Hey everybody, it's Neil Pasricha, and welcome back to chapter 111 of 3 books. If you are new here, you are listening to our epic 15-year-long quest to uncover and discuss the 1,000 most formative books in the world. We are doing that by searching out inspiring, intriguing, and interesting people, and we're asking them which 3 books most shaped your life. This is a small and mighty show that could. I'm purposely staying away from ads. I got no ads, no sponsors, no promotions, no interruptions, no commercials. We got values like no book shame, no book guilt, and we certainly have no remorse. And we are just loving hanging out with 3 bookers like you all around the world, people we call book lovers, writers, makers, sellers, and librarians, to geek out on big themes, chew on big themes, through the power of reading. Today, we have an incredible guest for you. If you don't know him, you're going to love him. If you do know him, you already love him. His name is Austin Kleon. Yes, he lives in Austin, Texas. I think if your name is Austin, you got to live in Austin for the full effect. He calls himself a writer who draws. He is the author of a number of New York Times bestselling books, including, and these are all favorites of mine, I have all of these on my bookshelf, including Steal Like an Artist, 10 Things Nobody Told You About Being Creative, Show Your Work, 10 Ways to Share Your Creativity, and Keep Going, 10 Ways to Stay Creative in Good Times and Bad. His books have been translated into dozens of languages, sold over 1 million copies, and he hangs out online at austinkleon.com. That's also home to his wonderful Substack, which is a great community that I am part of, and his wonderful Friday newsletter, 10 Things Worth Sharing, every single Friday morning. It's one of the few newsletters I open and read religiously every single week. Today, we are going to talk about writer and reader energies, number 0 tacos, the Japanese word sundoku, violence in America, dumb questions, the power of doodling, nature as a metaphor, car problems, Austin Kleon's 3 most formative books, and much, much more. Order yourself a taco, grab a margarita, put on a tank top and some shades, and come hang out with us down on a metal wobbly table on the patio of Mi Madre's Mexican restaurant in East Austin, Texas. All right, are you ready? Let's flip the page into chapter 111 now.
It's the ultimate pool accessory, actually, if you have a pool.
Really?
Because I'll literally be like floating in the pool, and I can like answer a text or like change the music.
Yeah, you don't gotta go anywhere.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So,
Well,
like,
they say these things are taken
it's
off.
pretty tight.
I've been razzing my buddy who works at Apple for these advertisements because the ads are like, some old person falls in the forest and like their Apple Watch saves their life.
Right.
That whole idea, and I've been kind of cynical about those ads. Fear-based. Fear-mongering.
Yeah, that one is kind of funny. I know which one you're talking about, but it's weird. Like, isn't it an essential tool? No, but it's kind of fun. And my neighbor is in his 70s, and we ride bikes, and I talk into it, and he'll be like, "Oh, you got your James Bond, watch out."
First of all, I love that you rode your bike with your 70-year-old neighbor. So we are at Mi Madre's, a restaurant in East Austin. It's been here since 1990. We are outside on the patio, as you may hear. There's music blaring from tiny little black speakers up on the wall around. There's kind of like a wood lattice work around us, if you can picture it. Little hanging lights that are not on right now because it's the daytime. A big, old, rusty, dusty fan swinging left and right. A red kind of clapboard wall to Austin's left. We are sitting at a teal kind of metal crisscross table. Veronica, we love the guacamole.
Yes.
And what kind of taco did you get, Austin?
I got the number 4.
The number 4, which
That's
for audio listeners.
That's eggs, beans, and cheese on flour.
Nice, delicious. And you pour some.
One of the things that you'll know if everybody's got their numbers here.
Yes.
Right? So when you come to Mi Madre's with somebody, you ask them, well, what number do you get?
Well, I asked my Uber driver on the way from the airport who told me that his godparents run this place. That's a small town, as you say. And he said, get the number 0. And I was surprised by that for a few reasons. One of which was I couldn't believe a number 0 exists. Most menus begin at number 1. This keep Austin weird.
The 0's the classic. That is potato, bacon, cheese, and egg.
Yeah,
that's
nice.
the breakfast.
Well, this is the thing about Austin. You got not just tacos at the lunchtime or the evening, the breakfast taco. So we're surrounded by grackles. You can probably hear them. Just people kind of walking by on the sidewalk. gentleman enjoying a taco to the left of us. Looking good.
He's probably
is that a daiquiri with it or something?
He's
Frozen
probably
margarita?
regretting sitting here. Is what he's.
And then I got Austin in front of me, and Austin is wearing a baseball cap with a. I was gonna say when you walked up from a distance, the Detroit Tigers logo, but it's like half the D. So what? That's not the Detroit Tigers, obviously.
There's a place about 3 hours from here called Lady Lodge, and they have these caps. And when I stayed there, I liked them so much they gave me one.
Nice.
So I like to wear it around to confuse people because they think, oh, he's Detroit, and then oh, Magnum, and then they get close and it's not.
It's nice to wear a ball cap that people don't know. It's the big calligraphic L. You've got some nice shades on, or kind of a permanent sunglasses, kind of. I guess in this heat, this sun.
Well, they're prescription, so it's if I have to take them off, I can't see.
Right, and you're wearing a black T-shirt. It says "Dang" in big letters on it. There's a drawing at the bottom. It says Linda Berry, who we're gonna talk about. I'm wearing like a white polo shirt. I got blue shorts. And you, the three booker listening to this, is sitting on the chair between us, which right now just has In Praise of Good Booksters, which is a book I thought you might like. Well, Austin, I'm so excited to talk about your formative books. But to kick us off, I thought what I could do is, you have said more about books and reading than almost anybody I've ever interviewed on this show. So I've pulled out for you some of your quotes about books. And I'm going to read them back to you just to get us started, create like an oral tapestry here. And you can expand, explain, elucidate as you see fit, or as George Saunders told us in chapter 75, deny if you want, if you want to deny. Okay, number one, books are stored energy. That's a quote you said on the Book Dreams podcast. Books are stored energy.
Are you asking me to comment?
You can expand, you can explain, you can elucidate, or you can pass. You can just hang out in the ether. No pressure.
I mean, my theory of reading is that an author brings all their energy to the text, and they put everything they've got into the book, and then that energy is stored, in that essential package, and then the reader brings their energy to the book and unlocks the original energies from the author. And sometimes the energies don't match. Sometimes the book isn't, the writer and the reader don't link up, and so it's a matter of the kind of magic of reading is when the writer's energies are unlocked by the reader's energies. And if you think of books that way, I think it keeps you from falling into lots of traps. One of the traps is that you read what you should read rather than what unlocks your own energy, because the point of a book should really be the author's energy kind of attracts your own and it unpacks something for you.
Wow. The author's energy attracts your own and it unpacks something for you. I love that. Number two, this is from your blog, one of the richest blogs on the internet, austinkleon.com. You wrote a post on January 1st, 2014 called My Reading Year of 2013, as you do every year. And the quote that I pulled out is, breakthrough this year, thinking of books as potential experiences, not just objects, matching up a book with my mood, life situation, etc. I'm guessing that kind of builds right off the last thing you said.
Yeah, I mean, like, the idea that Crime and Punishment is going to be the best book in all situations is absurd. Like, there's a time and place for Crime and Punishment, and then there's a time and place for an Elmore Leonard novel, and then there's a time and place for a Linda Berry comic, and it's that. I think I think about books a lot like I think about music, and I think that comes from my being a musician and being passionate about music. You wouldn't put on an opera, when you were hanging out with your friends. You would put on like
you wouldn't, and I wouldn't either. But some
something.
People might.
But no, you can't like Beethoven. You can't put on a Beethoven symphony and have a conversation.
Right, I hear what you're saying.
Like, that,
the
that, music
music is commanding.
Yeah,
It
so
takes the room.
there are different art really, this idea that art is great no matter the context is I think a really faulty one. I think a lot of great art, now some art does transcend multiple contexts, and it certainly changes with different contexts, but to me, reading is contextual.
Yeah.
It's not just about the book. It's about what is going on in your life. What are you trying to do with yourself? And, what are your energies at the moment? Sometimes some books take more than they give. They need more energy to unlock. Think of it that way, like a really dense book or something like that.
Malcolm Gladwell told us on this program that a book shouldn't reveal its secrets to you on the first read.
Malcolm Gladwell said that?
Mm-hmm. We were talking about the spy who came in from the cold, the John le Carré book, and he said, every time I read this book, and he's read it every 5 years for 20, 30 years, I get something different out of it. It keeps revealing itself to me more and more.
Well, part of that, though, also is that the book doesn't change, but you do.
Yes.
I mean, every time you come to a book, you're a different person with different energies and different experiences. And so that's part of the deal. Like Malcolm Gladwell, last year, hopefully is not the same Malcolm Gladwell that he is now.
No man walks in the same river twice.
Right.
2019 blog post on AustinKleon.com. The title of the blog post is How to Read More. You say, gigantic book piles aren't a sign you're doing it wrong. They're a sign you're doing it right.
Yeah, I mean, people get real guilty about their unread book piles, and to me, it's a win for possibility. In that, book piles are hopeful, in the sense that you might get to them someday. I mean, at some point, a reader has to, a writer too, actually. A reader has to come to the realization at some point that they simply don't have the years to get all the books that they're ever going to want to get. And so there is a real triage and there's a choosing that has to happen.
Yeah.
But if you can kind of get cool with that and know you're never going to be able to read everything, then you can kind of take things as they come, and you can kind of, you can enjoy yourself more.
There's a Japanese word you sometimes talk about. Is it sundoku?
Yeah, sundoku, I think, or I certainly don't know how it's pronounced, but it is the phenomenon of books piling up.
Nice. Beautiful.
Unread piles of books.
I got just two more. The One You Feed podcast, which is a wonderful interview. We'll link to this in the show notes. I would love people to check this out. It's a wonderful interview, and I dropped Eric a line to tell him I thought he did a great job chatting with you. You can read all the books in the world. I love books. I mean, I've staked my life on books, but at the end of the day, you've got to live your life. The experience is what's going to drill it into you.
Yeah, I mean, Junot Diaz said something one time. He was like, you should read more than you write, and you should live more than you read.
Oh, nice.
And I like that. Although sometimes I'd rather read than live. Sometimes, life can be kind of boring. Sometimes, but then sometimes life is more interesting than books.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, the hope is that I was thinking about this. I got in a little tiff with somebody online, which I never recommend, but following our own rules is the hardest thing in life. And I got in this tiff with a guy online who was talking about how important travel is. And I was kind of pushing back on him because I like to mess... People who think travel's, changes your life.
Yeah.
They're always talking about it. And I'm like, I like to mess with them because it's like messing with it's like messing with someone's religious beliefs or something. It's like heckling, because people hold on to that notion that travel is so important.
Yes.
They really hold tight to it. And I think part of it is they want to feel good about all the time they've spent traveling. But the thing I'm always pushing back on people about is like, well, travel can change you if you want to be changed. I mean, if that's part of your impulse. I usually think that what travel does is it gives you fresh eyes for where you come back to. But I think books can do that too. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, most of my favorite some of my favorite writers literally didn't go anywhere. Like Thoreau never went anywhere. Like, he went to Maine and then he went to like Boston. But like, he never really went anywhere. Emily Dickinson didn't really go anywhere.
I mean, not too long ago, people couldn't go anywhere. I mean,
yeah, it wasn't really an option.
It's a pretty new idea,
right?
And so around.
I'm very interested in this idea that books are like a really cheap form of travel. They can be deeper in some ways than travel. They can show you more in some ways. And then in other ways, you go to a book to come back. I mean, you go to a book to go into another world or another person's head, but then you come back, and it's the coming back, the re-entry, where the work kind of happens, because it might not happen right away. I mean, that's the other thing, and you see this in education all the time. It's like you might read a book this week that, on the whole didn't do much for you this week, but it might come back to you in a year or 2 years, and so your experience, it's just like travel, actually. You might go on a trip and come back, and then later on it becomes something more meaningful to you.
And perhaps like travel, it's hard to predict from the beginning.
Absolutely.
Which trip you're going to like the most, or what part of the vacation you will.
I mean, you know this from traveling around. I mean, places will surprise you. Like, you might have a better time in a place that you thought was going to be a real bore.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And the last one, page 24 of Keep Going, which I think is vastly underrated. I'm going to throw out there.
Thank you.
Because everyone always talks to you about Steal Like an Artist.
I appreciate
everyone's
that.
always talking Steal Like an Artist, Steal Like an Artist, Steal Like an Artist. I love the other two just as much. And so,
thank you.
And actually the other three, because Newspaper Blackout is wonderful too. Keep Going. You have a list called How to Be Happy in the Book. And your number one thing on the list is read old books. How does that actually make you happy?
Well, that's a good question. It doesn't actually make me happy. That's a weird word, happy. I mean, you know more about that word than I do. I think
not necessarily.
I think the thing
you
about...
might have just gone past me to the point where it's now confusing again.
Well, that's a fun topic. I just like meeting people that I would never be able to meet otherwise. So, like, old books. It's time travel. Who doesn't want to be part of a time travel? Like, I grew up with, like, when I was growing up, like, Back to the Future was the coolest movie. I mean, it was one of the coolest movies. And it's time travel. Books are time travel devices. And they're cheap. They're travel devices, And so for me, it's a form of time travel. And there's nothing at stake. Like, nothing's gonna happen to you. There's no real danger. Your only danger is that you might, like, change your mind about something.
I thought you were gonna say paper cut or something.
Yeah, paper cut. That's good. Yeah, paper cut.
Wonderful. Well, I was holding myself back as you responded to all those, because we could have picked any of them and gone 20,000 miles below the surface. But what we've done, I hope, for the listeners to this and for me, is just set a nice little landscape of, like, this is the level we're going to talk about books within, It's like, it's an emotional experience. You come out a different way. It's time travel. It meets you here. You come out. This is like books as real emotional growth entities. At some point on your journey, Austin, you bumped into a book called Lies My Teacher Told Me. Everything Your American History Textbook Got Wrong by James W. Loewen. I think it's Loewen.
Yeah, he just died recently.
James Loewen lived from 1942 to 2021, an American sociologist, historian, and author, best known for this disruptive book. The book was published in 1995 by the New Press. I'm holding a very thick paperback in my hand right now. It says national bestseller across the top. It has an empty teacher's desk with a pile of books, an apple, and a green chalkboard behind it, which is holding the blurb, powerful and important, deserves to be an instant classic by the Washington Post Book World. In a big sort of white Arial-style font, it says, Lies My Teacher Told Me. And underneath that, the author's font is in red, James W. Loewen, author of Lies Across America. Very quickly, Lies My Teacher Told Me critically examines 12 popular American high school history textbooks. And in this book, Loewen concludes that the textbook authors propagate false, Eurocentric, and mythologized views of American history. Dewey Decimal Heads, you can file this one under 973 for History and Geography / North America / United States. Austin, please tell us about your relationship with Lies My Teacher Told Me by James W. Loewen.
Well, when I read this book...
Thank you, Veronica.
I would have been...
bringing us more water on the hot day.
13, 14, 15. Thank you. And my parents would have been going through a divorce at the time. And right around that time, this is one of the things I was hoping we'd talk about today. When we talk about formative books, there's usually like a book that's like kind of a center of a network, but there's all these other books around it. So I think I actually picked up Lies My Teacher Told Me because I'd been reading Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States,
right,
which I found out about because I had watched Good Will Hunting, which was a famous movie that day, and
yes, Matt
Damon mentions it,
yeah.
And I got it from the library. So when I was at the Walden Books at the mall with my mom, I saw that on the shelf, and it had Howard Zinn. If your parents go through a divorce and you're sort of watching the fabric of your life kind of, there's something essential that's kind of coming apart for you when you're a kid. If you're listening to a lot of punk rock, like I was at the time, and reading George Orwell, 1984, and Lies My Teacher Told Me, and A People's History of the United States, and then another book at that time. Oh, there was one other one on my mind. Oh, there used to be a site called Disinformation.
Yeah.
So there was a disinformation guide to lies you're being told. So this idea that as a kid you're lied to, and then when you become an adult, the lies get like kind of uncovered. That was very powerful for me when I was like 14 or 15. This idea that everyone had been lying to me, and that is sort of an adolescent feeling. It is that, wait a minute, this magical world I've been kind of presented as a kid, now all of a sudden I have to, operate in this crueler world. And I think a lot of people are sort of, there's something about divorce in particular that kind of exposes that, you to that feeling. And so I think I just really got off on this idea that people are lying, and the world that we're being presented is not necessarily the one that's true. And so when I read Lies My Teacher Told Me, this is right up my alley because my my parents are both educators, and the whole narrative of my young life had been be good in school, and as long as you're good in school, you'll achieve and progress and whatever. So the idea that school is inherently flawed, particularly in this field.
I mean, this guy, he takes down Columbus in a chapter.
Yeah,
he takes down everything you could possibly believe about the history of America, chapter by chapter.
Yeah, and I ate that stuff up because that's the kind of stuff that you're at. You're sitting at Thanksgiving dinner and you're like, well, Columbus was a murderer, right? Drop that kind of stuff. But that this had a lot of energy for me. I mean, because one of the things that's really interesting is like, if you feel like you've been lied to and the world is fundamentally different than what the kind of default setting or whatever has been presented to you, on the one hand, you could be angry and lash out about that. On the other hand, if you can get to the other side of that, that means the world, there's all kinds of possibilities. What else have I been lied to? What else is not true? What else have I not seen? And so it kind of blows the world open.
What did you think was true about you? Because you've mentioned the divorce, and I've heard you talk about it lightly in other places, but not. I don't think that. What about marriage or relationships or love or a home? Were these also things that were becoming stretched at the time? Because you said you read this book at the time your parents were splitting up.
I think what I was interested in is how people change once your family is not intact. You watch how people behave differently around you. And that was sort of what I was interested in as a kid looking back, is this idea of just that, like, once your parents are split, then all of a sudden you're not like this normative, family walking around. You've got some fact about you that is new, and people don't really want to talk about it. That's, I don't know. It was interesting to me. I just felt like it just felt like the world was cracking open, but it was cracking open in like an interesting way as a teenager.
I still remember the very first thing I said to my therapist on my very first therapy session as I was going through my divorce. I was in my late 20s. And he said, so, what do you want to talk about? And I said, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be a divorced person. I don't want to have this label on. I was having a lot of trouble coming to terms with the word. It had so much baggage to me, and it was,
Right.
you know, I sometimes forget now that I am divorced, but at the time it was like, it really opened up a lot of, you know, it did something for me probably a lot later in life than it did for you, which is pull back a curtain in a way.
I would not classify my childhood as happy by any stretch. I did not have a nice. I always felt a little out of. I like a lot of artists. I felt I felt really out of place in rural America. I was not interested in football or, you know, I just didn't. I wasn't interested in sports. I was a smart person who was interested in books and writing.
Did you have that label already back then, artist? When did you come to identify with that?
It's probably called a faggot more than anything. I mean, not to use that. That's a horrible word.
No, but
I mean, you know, the one thing I will say about my gay friends is no one can equate that experience, but you kind of understand the violence of being different when you're growing up in like a small town. Like I won't say that anything super violent ever happened to me, but I will definitely say that, well, that might not even be true, but there's a certain low level, when I was growing up, there's kind of a low level violence of being a threat of being different. You know, and I think that's a very American story.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of kids feel that. I also, I'm trying to think of when Columbine happened. Columbine was like 99, 98.
Okay.
Yeah, 98, 99. So I would have been 15, 16 at the time. And so like all these kind of questions of violence and, you know, I'm very interested now when you know, kids who, I'm just very interested now in looking back at my young life and how desperately I kind of wanted to be normal, but like I obviously wasn't.
Huh.
And so,
and the slurs got thrown in there,
you know,
and that because I
I think the reason I use that word, and I kind of hate to use that word, but it's like that was the word. If you were different, like if you were a guy that liked different things, that's what you were.
I mean, and I'm not that much older than you, and it was same.
Nice
when I was
hair, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
I mean, like, to me, that's the word that comes up in my head a lot, and that's how deeply rooted I think homophobia and the macho American culture that's there. I don't know if it's as there now. Actually.
And how relieving it must have been to read a book like this that sort of started to dismantle some of the system that you were kind of living in.
Yeah, I mean, like and also the terror of understanding that America's always run on violence. It's a violent country. We can't, I mean, Europeans came here and they systematically imposed violence on this landscape, on the people and the landscape until it did what they wanted them to do. And that's a fundamental fact. I would find it hard to argue against that and so when you kind of unpack that, you know, but I don't find these things, it's interesting. I don't really feel these things are essential and crucial. They're not on my mind that often anymore. Mm-hmm. I think part of the joy, my narrative when I was younger was I'm getting out of here.
Okay.
When I was younger, I was like, I'm getting out of here.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do, I'm very interested in the word pass.
PASS?
So like, PASS.
Yeah.
So if, they use that a lot for like, the idea of passing. Like passing for, like I'm very interested in that. And I felt like I'm going to pass enough that I was valedictorian in my high school. I was super high achieving. I was like, I'm going to pass, and I'm going to pass in a big way, as in pass the hell out of here. And that was my whole narrative when I was growing up. I'm getting out of here. And, you know, what's kind of interesting is there's a great Patton Oswalt skit where he talks about Sterling, Virginia, where he grew up. And he talks about how much he hated Sterling, couldn't wait to get out of there, and all this stuff. And then later in another stand-up special, he starts talking about Sterling again. And he talks about reconnecting with people back home. And he says, you know what? It was my fault. Like, I'm the person that was different. Like, it wasn't Sterling's fault. I was the one that was like I was the one that needed. I'm the person that's different. So it's kind of interesting because they're I thought that was a very mature, if not, way of looking at it. Yeah. But I always knew I was getting out there.
And you mentioned in the last couple sentences ago, you used the word home. Mm-hmm. How do you define home now?
I did a blackout poem one time that says, home is me and you in any town. I mean, home is where you come in the door and you're accepted. That's what home is. You open the door and you're in there, and that's why so many people don't have a home. They don't grow up with a home like that. I will say I always received pretty much unconditional love from my parents, and that really was a through line for me. What was really cool is we lived in an old ranch house that had been expanded, and it's probably not twice as big as my house now, but it's a kind of sprawling ranch, and my parents just gave me part of the house. They were just like, yeah, you can have this. Like, just, you can have this room. And so that idea of a room of one's own, that you can, that I had from the very beginning. So I always had, like in high school, I mean, I'm trying to get back to that room I had in high school. Basically, I spent my whole adult existence trying to get back to that room, which is like the piano.
You're building a studio now, right?
I am right now, and it's like the piano's there, the drawing table's there, the TV and the couch are here, the drum set's here, the guitars, like the computer. It's like I had a space, and I think that fundamentally is the hour spent. My wife and I always talk about how, like, she actually got a better education than I did in high school. She went to a girls' school in Cleveland. I got a much poorer education, public education, but I had unbelievable free time. So I'd get home from high school, it'd be like 2:30, and I didn't have a parent home until like 4 or 5. So I just spent that whole time, and I wasn't hanging out with my friends because I had to get off the bus and you were home. So like I spent a lot of time just playing guitar, reading books, watching a lot of movies I got from the library on VHS, like that was. So in some ways it's interesting. I'm an elder millennial, but I really sort of, my Gen X friends, we sort of bond more because I think I had more of a Gen X upbringing just from the fact that I grew up in rural America. I think rural America sort of puts you back a few years. So like, yeah, I always feel more like aligned with Gen X.
Interesting. And it's something worth pausing on for everybody, and myself included. What is the room of one's own that you may be chasing or trying to recultivate? I love your definition of home. Leslie and I's first dance at our wedding was Home by Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros.
Yeah.
Yeah. That song. Yep. This book came out in 95. If you think about it at the time, it's talking about misinformation, disinformation, the threat of kind of listening to the wrong voices. On page 356, James Lowen writes, "We all need to become crap detectors." And it just strikes me that the world's got a lot more crap and misinformation in the 30 years since this book has come out. So
yeah.
I'd love to talk a little bit about that. How do you think about tuning your crap detector? What to you is crap? What isn't? I mean, I got on the Uber drive over here, and this is just like a 7-minute drive from the airport. I learned that because I was wearing a mask in the back of the Uber, and I said, I know people here don't wear masks, and he's like, oh, you don't need to. Mega hats are what you wear on the right. The masks are what you wear if you're on the left. I said, well, what about the science? And he said, the whole point of science is to question science. Anyone says, listen, the science isn't following science. And he's like, most of the scientists are bought and paid for. So, I mean, I learned a lot, right? My BS detector, my crap detector was, let's just say, the needle was going crazy, right? Like, I was listening, and I'm always curious, and so I'm always asking questions. But how do you think about that today for you and for your kids, right? You've got 2 boys.
Well, it's interesting because lies and bullshit are different. Bullshit is just someone kind of telling you what you might want to hear or sort of speaking to be speaking. I mean, like the former president here was great at that. He would just talk and he wouldn't really be saying anything. but he was really good at just bullshit. There's a great book called On Bullshit by, I forget his name. He's a philosophy teacher or something. Harry something.
That's enough. We got it in the show notes. Anything you say like that, a title and author,
great.
to the show notes.
Okay. Lies are manipulations. Lies are like structural in that they're trying to present something to you for a reason. And so for me, bullshit and lies is, bullshit can be fairly, it can be
benign.
toxic, but it can be benign. Lies are manipulation.
And we can maybe agree that that's becoming more of like the deep fakes, the videos that you can't tell if they're true or not.
My question was always, who benefits from this story? What would this story prop up? And if you think about it that way,
I like that.
Like what would be what is the impulse behind this lie? Like what whether this that's a big thing for me.
But the problem with that, though, I would ask you is like when I watch the Apple Watch TV clip and I'm like, this is just they're the most profitable company in the history of the universe. This is just a way to sell more watches. Mm-hmm. That's true. Mm-hmm. And also could also be true that if you fall in a forest and you can't get up, your phone's going to save you because it's going to tell people where you are. Like there's always somebody who's motivated by anything. So it doesn't necessarily help us filter, does it?
Well,
could you always find someone who benefits?
Well, yeah. That's what the world is. Yeah, for sure. For me, it's like who's present. Apple's trying to sell you things. So like they're presenting that's their ultimate goal. They don't care about anything else. They just care. They want to sell this product. So for me, like the lies my teacher told me stuff is like the way these textbooks are written is they're selling you a version of America in order that you will fall in line with this vision. This notion that we're, a special place, that we, that there's forward progress, that we're a progressive place, that we're, always moving forward and all that kind of stuff. So, I don't know. It's very difficult now, but in library science, they teach you to look at, and all kinds of research, they tell you to look at sources and, be critical and to weigh things and whatever.
It's not easy though, right?
I also think that here's my other thing. What you want to do is you want to think about the vision that's being presented to you about the world and what is the end result of that vision. So like a world with masks, what happens? People wear masks. Unless people get sick, it's just like to me. It's like that kind of the fundamental problem I think with America is that freedom is presented as your right to do violence to your property, like it's your right to you could do whatever you want with your property. That's built into the racism of slavery. Because once you make people subhuman, they become things, and then you can do things to them. It's in property rights, like, we're in the middle of Texas, and the idea that you could do whatever you want with your property is like a very
you can carry
embedded.
A gun here.
Yeah, it's about doing. Freedom has become the notion that you can do violence to your environment. That's really what freedom has become here. It hasn't been.
And then redefine it, or help us chiropractor adjust that word to what it should mean or did mean or
I think
what was it before?
Well, I think that freedom is really your ability to connect with your community. Like freedom should be your ability to move freely throughout your community, to be free from harm, to stay healthy, to live your life and to make connections. Because if you think about the opposite, I'm cribbing from David Graeber here. I just read his book Debt. If you think about slavery, like the essential thing that slavery does is it destroys all your ties to anything that made you human before. Like it takes you out of your context. So when people are taken out of the context of their family or their community or the continent, they are made inhuman by taking them out of context. And so for me, it's like freedom is really being able to interact in your environment and make connections and live your best life, which is why I don't think I felt particularly free when I was young. That's why now with my kids, I bought a house that was walkable to a bunch of stuff that was, you could grab the bus and go downtown. You could ride your bike on the bike path. It was very important to me. I mean, I always try to keep in mind Andrew Solomon's line that we give our kids what we didn't have that we wanted.
Interesting.
But for me, it's like, when I got a car when I was a kid, that was, I hate cars now. I hate what cars have done to cities. I hate the whole, I fundamentally detest cars because they're just the dumbest. They're just a dumb design. It's just a poorly designed machine. It uses this dirty fuel. It ruins the planet. It's expensive. The bicycle, on the other hand, to me is like a incredible technology. Like, here's a 150-year-old technology that's human-powered, easy to fix on your own, fairly affordable. Anyone can have one.
Doesn't take that much longer to get the same place. I mean, unless you go somewhere super far.
Yeah,
if you're going somewhere 20 minutes away, it might take 25 or 30.
But now, rural America, a bicycle's not going to do much for you.
I feel like we're both fans of Walkable City by Jeff Speck.
I don't know that one, but I am. I mean, walkability to me is a real factor of, if I went back to rural America, I would live in town. So I could walk everywhere.
Page 355 of this book, there's a quote from a writer who I know you like, Neil Postman.
Yeah.
And the quote is, once you have learned how to ask questions, relevant and appropriate and substantial questions, you have learned how to learn. And no one can keep you from learning whatever you want or need to know.
That's from Teaching as a... It's funny because I haven't looked at this book in a long time, and I know the book that comes from. That's from Teaching as a Subversive Activity. And this is a great thing about the reading life. I read this book when I was 14, and only now do I have the sources that the book comes from. I've made my way back around to the things that writer was reading.
And how do we learn how to do that? Because, he's saying you got to learn how to ask good questions.
Well,
help me out with that one. We're trying to do that on this podcast, but...
An easy way to find... Well, there's two different things. One, you look in the back of the book and you read the bibliography, which you learn very easy. But as far as good questions, I don't know. I mean, the questions thing is interesting. I actually think... people say there is no such thing as a stupid question. I actually think dumb questions are the better questions. I mean, the dumber your questions in some ways... the better you can get to the heart of the situation. Kids are great at this because they ask why 100 times. Why do we have to drive to the store? Well, we got to get food. Well, why do you got to get food at a store? Because, and you start unraveling your whole culture. That asking why is... Kids are great at that. Kids, and this is what kids are really, really good at. They want to know everything about their world. They're curious in a way that adults aren't, and they have no preconceived notions of what anything is, and so they're really natural artists or scientists, because they're really inquisitive about the world, and they don't have any preconceived notions about it.
I imagine having you as a father who was an artist who grew up in rural America and felt slightly stifled will be really beneficial to kids today. Therefore, a question is going to go, how do you retain that? How do you keep that in your kids as they get to become teenagers and early 20-somethings? How do you not chisel it off like the book warns us could happen?
I leave them alone a lot. I mean, I really believe in self-directed learning. I mean, that's what my parents did for me. I mean, my parents kind of let me go and let me do. They had very strong, there was structure, there were boundaries. But what you did within the boundaries was kind of your own.
How do you let a 7-year-old go? Like a Saturday morning, you do your own thing, he does his own thing?
Well, I mean, a 7-year-old, in our house, it's like at some point the TV goes off, and then it's like
I'm happy to hear that the TV was on. It made me feel less guilty about the amount of TV.
My kids watch a lot of TV. I watch a lot of TV, actually. I grew up watching a lot of TV. TV is what mom and dad put on so they can have 2 minutes to themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? I mean,
so then you turn the TV off.
And in some ways, TV is a lot better than an iPad or a computer, because the TV you can kind of control what's on there. It's a hell of a lot better than YouTube. Like, my God, giving an iPad with YouTube on it to a kid, that's.
Sorry, when you say TV, I wasn't understanding, but you're talking about like clicking channels on cable. Is that what you're talking about when you say TV?
Well,
as opposed to the auto recommendation engine feeding you endless algorithmized content.
When they were really young, they watched there's a PBS Kids channel here in Austin. Like, that was really cool about the PBS station here, is they have a dedicated channel for kids. So I used to watch that.
We got that in Canada too, TVO.
Yeah, so like that used to be on. Now they go on Netflix and watch their little kid shows, and they're really into. Oh God, they're really into the like videos where some dork plays Minecraft and.
But retaining that childhood sensibility of open-ended questions and natural curiosity. The TV goes off on the Saturday morning, and then what happens at the Kleon house?
Well, then it's chaos. I mean, they're like fighting with each other, and
That's chaos.
Just sit down and. But what the thing? It's really about. Families are really about dynamics, and you just don't know what you're going to get with each kid. So my oldest kid is like extremely. He's very much wants to be in everyone's business. He's very much like what would happen if I did this and upset everyone. And then he wants to be like very locked in and center of attention and stuff. My other kid's extremely introverted and would be happy to be in his room drawing all day. So it's navigating that. They're both extremely creative, but they're creative in like different ways. So it's like trying to keep them from annoying each other to violence. And you have boys, you know what?
Yeah, but there's so much to that phrase, though. You don't know what you're going to get. I think that's vastly underrated. I remember years ago, I think on your blog, you posted about some book. Maybe it was on Twitter. I was following you. You posted about some book that's about like how to be a parent. Every page was like blank, or every page was like. Every kid is different. That's
Colson Whitehead. That's Colson Whitehead. He said the name of my parenting book is "Good Luck with That. Everyone's different. Everyone's different, and every chapter is a topic. It's a topic like feeding, sleeping, or whatever. Yeah. And then the only text is "Good luck with that. Everyone's different."
I love that. There's a lot of wisdom in that. Lies my teacher told me. Everything your American history textbook got wrong. A book that Austin Kleon read as he was in his kind of like late adolescence or early teen years. Let's transition now to your second book, which I am going to go out on a whim because I know when you read your third book. So I'm going to guess that your second book chronologically is called What It Is by Lynda Barry. That's Barry. Published in 2008 by Drawn and Quarterly. This is an unbelievably hard to describe, large, handwritten, hand-drawn, entirely hand-colored hardcover. About the size and shape of a textbook, actually. It's doodles, comics, blues, yellows, orange. On the cover of it, it's like what it is like got little metal studs on it against a blue background. There's paint chips at it. There's little words collaged across the top, as somebody I'm sitting with does himself. The formless thing which gives things form. Inside, outside. What is an image? Do you wish you could write? Dramatically illustrated with more than, and then there's an ink blotch, color pictures. All kinds of little animals and mythological creatures are here. Lynda Barry, born in 1956 in Wisconsin, still alive today, American cartoonist, author, and teacher, best known for her weekly comic strip, Ernie Pook's Comique, Comeek, The Good Times Are Killing Me, and 100 Demons. What's the summary of this book? How do objects summon memories? What do real images feel like? For decades, these types of questions have permeated the pages of Lynda Barry's compositions, with words attracting pictures and conjuring places. What It Is demonstrates a tried and true creative method that is playful, powerful, and accessible to anyone with an inquisitive wish to write or to remember. Part memoir, part collage, part workbook, Barry instructs her readers in methods to open up their own creativity. The book won the Comic Industry Sedaris' 2009 Eisner Award for Best Reality-Based Work. And Dewey Decimal Heads, you can follow it under my favorite Dewey Decimal category growing up, 741.59. That's the category I'd always go to for drawings / cartoons, caricatures, and comics. Tell us about your relationship, Austin, with What It Is by Lynda Barry.
Well, I mean, Linda's sort of my great teacher and hero from afar. I mean, so the story of how I came in touch with Linda's work is my wife's from Cleveland, and we lived in Cleveland Heights after college. And one of the things I used to do in Cleveland when I was first getting started is I just started a blog, and I used to go to readings a lot of other writers, and I would draw them. That was sort of the thing I did, because back then it was a differentiator. One, you couldn't get very good pictures unless you had a really good camera. Like, this is before cell phone cameras got real good.
Yep.
And
what's the approximate time?
This would be 2005, 2006. Okay. And so I went to see this guy named Dan Shawn, who's an incredible fiction writer, who has a new book coming out soon called Sleepwalk. And I went to see him read, and I drew him, and Kelly Link was an incredible, Kelly Link and I think it was Ellen, I forget her last name. I'm sorry, I'm blanking. It was another writer, Kelly Link and Dan Shawn, great writer. I mean, just lucked out, because Kelly Link's like one of the best short story writers working.
Just like at a bookstore? Or?
This was at Max Backs around the corner from our apartment.
Is that a bookstore?
That's a bookstore in Cleveland.
Max Backs.
And it's still around.
I like that.
Yep.
Paperbacks, hardbacks, we got all kinds of backs.
Everything. Max Backs. So I was in the basement of Max Backs, and I drew everyone, and then what I would do is I would draw them, and then I would write up what what they talked about, and what happened at the event. And Dan saw, what I quickly found out is if you write about someone, and if you draw them and you write about them, especially in 2005, 2006 on your blog, they're going to find it, because everyone,
Googles themselves.
Yeah. I found that out real quick. So then
that still holds true today, I think.
Right.
To some extent.
Yeah, I think so.
To some extent, if you talk about people, they're going to hear it.
So Dan said, "Oh, you drew me like a Lynda Barry character." And I said, "Who's Lynda Barry?" And, he freaked out and was like, "I can't believe you don't know who this person is." And after Dan and I went to coffee a few times, he was very, very generous with me. And Dan, we hung out I used to see him at the grocery store, because we were in the same neighborhood. And he was very, very kind to me, and took me out to coffee a few times, and he said, "We're having Lynda at Oberlin." That's where Dan was in the creative writing department at Oberlin in Ohio, which is a very well-known school in Ohio. Why don't you come?
You should come.
Yeah, and see this woman. So I show up, and it's in a chem lab. That's where they did the reading, in like a chemistry lab at Oberlin. And this woman came in, and she just had this. Anyone who's ever met Lynda Barry knows that she just has this magic. She calls it magic hippie energy. She just sort of exudes this. It's a very spiritual kind of experience being around
add
Lynda.
Some more adjectives to that energy. So she walks into the room.
You're in a hippie energy.
Magic hippie energy.
She radiates energy. She is radiant. She's a radiant. I don't know if she still gets nervous, but she gets she uses her nervousness as a superpower when she's talking to a room, or she did back then. And so she got up, she took off her cowboy boots, and stood in her bare feet, and she read from this book called Cruddy, which is her novel, and it was just, the whole room just was like, oh.
Austin is holding his hand and pulling it down and making a facial expression that's like a wow. Is that it?
It's like seeing a band that's really great. It's like seeing someone who's really special. To me, Lynda Barry's like James Brown or something. It's that level of aura and I don't know if James Brown's the right example, but she, you know, she's special. Everyone knows that. Like when she's in a room, everyone knows that this person is special. So she read from Cruddy, and Dan invited us, my wife and I. She was my fiance at the time. She invited Meg and I to come to the bar afterwards and hang out with Linda, and spent like an hour, 2 hours at the bar. And I have run my whole career off that, you know, both Dan and Linda would probably like, oh God, what did we do? But, you know, that really is where things really came together for me at that evening, because Linda was the first person I ever met who was able to sort of project everything that I wanted to be. That it was in her. The way that she thought about pictures and words, the way she thought about creativity, the way she thought about writing, her extreme Midwesternness too. I mean, she grew up in the Northwest, but she lives in Wisconsin, and she makes a joke about how she's half Filipino, half Norwegian, but Norwegian blood will suck the color out of everything. You know, she tells that joke and stuff. So
she is half Filipino.
She is half Filipino, and just
in a very challenging childhood based on this book.
Yeah, and a very rough, very unhappy childhood. And all of her work comes out of that well. You know, her real achievement as an artist is she's able to go back to childhood in a way that not many people can, and evoke that in her work, in her comics. Now, when I met Linda, she was about to start her second act, and that's what's really interesting is when I met Linda, all the alternative papers that her comic strip had run in for 30 years were folding. So Linda was about to start the second career as a person who teaches, as a teacher. So at the time that I met her, she had to be at this really interesting juncture. I mean, I've never talked to her about this and never heard her talk about it, but she had to be at a point in which things were about to change for her. So after I became a Linda Berry nut, this is 2006. So What It Is, actually, the first pages from What It Is came out in an issue of Tin House that I still have. Mm-hmm. So
Tin House is like a literary magazine.
A literary magazine. Mm-hmm. And so anything Linda ever did after that, I just stalked her online. Like anything Linda ever did, like I was there. So when What It Is came out, I mean, it was just,
2008, 3 years after the bar.
So I had moved to Texas by then, and I was ready for it. You know, I was teed up. I had read a lot of the stuff that was in it. It's funny, I actually have a little collection. I didn't know you were going to get this. I have a whole What It Is. I have
Austin's rubbing the cover of the book here.
I have the Tin House issue that the first pages were in. I have the Free Comic Book Day. Drawn and Quarterly did a whole comic book, the activity book in the back. They published that before the book. I have all those things that I collected as I was going.
So what happened at the bar? You go to the bar, you're with Meg, you're with your wife, you're invited amongst this little cadre of writers, authors, illustrators. Was there something she said?
Yeah. I don't know. It was just chit-chat.
Okay.
And she was really excited. I remember her being excited that we were getting married because she loves being married. She's married to a prairie restoration.
Uh-huh.
So that's why she lives on a farm in Wisconsin, because Kevin does he restores prairies for a living. Yeah. That's what he does.
After a failed relationship with Ira Glass.
Yeah. Yeah, who actually is one of the terrible boyfriends in Linda's book, 100 Demons.
I was researching that. So Ira Glass of This American Life, you know, and his quote about everything she said about him is, "It was all right. I was a terrible person."
Because he's smart. Yeah, because he's smart and he knows that he can't dodge it. You know, like he owns it, which is good. Because he really can't. Yeah. So this to me was like, I just took so much from her. And then the other thing that happened is Dan invited me when George Saunders came to speak at Oberlin. That was another. Those two are very connected in that for George and for Linda, I'm not really on a first name basis with either of them, but they're both sort of there's a real spiritualism to writing for them. I mean, their writing comes out of their deep moral core, in a way that not all writers, their writing comes that way. So,
especially not nonfiction usually.
Yeah, and they're Chicago people. They've come from, so there's like a Midwestern connection there. George Saunders lived in Chicago for a long time, or he grew up there. So yeah, what it is just like it's in the DNA of Steal Like an Artist. It's just in some ways
collage based, lots of questions, provocative quotes,
very very textured.
There isn't a single computer. This book is, just to again say it's more than a 200-page book, entirely handwritten, hand-drawn. I don't think I've ever seen a book that's entirely handwritten, hand-drawn.
So the Use Your Hands chapter of Steal Like an Artist is directly inspired by Linda, and it starts with Linda.
So it's nice that I got the Linda acolyte. Is that the right word? You're a. Anyway.
I would say probably a disciple.
Disciple, that's the right word.
But the problem with that is Linda doesn't want disciples.
Okay.
She wants
Fan.
This is the interesting thing. You can't control who you influence, and so part of what I do is I just try to leave Linda alone. I just don't. I praise her. I'm very open about her influence, but I also try to leave her alone because she just doesn't need me nattering at her. I'm eternally grateful to her, and I will spread her books, but I try desperately to leave her alone because she is a person who needs a lot of. She is not in this for. She is a pure creature as far as creativity goes. She's not in it for anything other than she has to do. She has to do that. When you read a Linda Berry book, she had to do that.
There's a compulsiveness that's evident.
Well, compulsive maybe, yeah, but that keeps her alive. That when you read Linda Berry, that stuff keeps her alive, and she's very clear about how comics and drawing kept her alive.
Well, she talks about it. Page 111 of this book, she writes, a few blocks west of where she lived was the edge of Skid Row, in the beginning of a long street of peep shows, strip clubs, bars, X-rated theaters, and adult bookshops. It was a port town. There were vomiting sailors. There was also a head shop, and in the head shop were bootleg Neil Young albums and underground comics. If the hippie at the counter was the mellow yellow hippie, excuse me, I could go in. If the mean hippie was working, he'd kick me out, saying adults only. I went into the head shop scared, but doing it anyway. I bought underground comics and bootleg records with my saved up babysitting money, and I took the bus home reading them.
Yeah. We had completely different childhoods in a lot of ways. So, one of the things that is probably different than Linda and I is she has a lot more faith in the classroom as a place of possibility because school really saved her when she was a kid. When she was an unhappy kid, she had teachers, and the classroom was a safe space for her. It was a safe place to go, and there were books, and there were art supplies, and all that stuff. For me, school is a little bit more malevolent in the sense that I had all that stuff at home. I had to go to school and be around all these people. I'd rather just be at home with my stuff. So, it's interesting from a class perspective, though, too, just how, our upbringings were different that way. So she really locates a lot more possibility in the classroom than I do. Because I think school is fundamentally structured in a way that it will never. There's just things about school that, as it's structured, won't get fixed. But I do think her dedication as a classroom teacher really comes out of that. For her, classrooms are safe spaces. She grew up that way. I'm inferring that from her work, but I assume that because it seems like the atmosphere. She's also a born teacher. There are people that are just. It's in their makeup,
Sorry,
to teach.
just to dive deep into this classroom thing that you're opening up here, because we talked a little bit about unlearning or unschooling or free range or kind of free. But I'm assuming do your kids go to a local public school?
Yeah.
So they're in this broken system, the system that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And how do you think about that now? So you're you're an intentional father. You've got kids in the system that you see, it wasn't incredibly serving to you. And you see structural issues. Now, how do you think about that for your own kids?
Everything good that happens in a school is about the people in the school. So you have every teacher I've ever met, no, let me back up. Most teachers I meet are incredible. They you know, I mean, you got to have a certain... Any work that's truly valuable in this culture, we don't pay well enough. I mean, it's almost like the problem with this culture is that if you're doing work that's meaningful and does something, well, you should just be happy that you get to do that work anyway. And so we don't reward it, you know? So to be a teacher is already to enter into a kind of if not outright poverty, a poverty of respect and compensation. So, like, for me, every teacher I meet is up against impossible odds. And so, for me, it's like, it just comes down to who's in that room. I mean, it comes down to the kids that are in that room, what their families look like, where they come from, and then it comes down to the teacher that's in the room. So, as broken as the system is, the classroom is a site of possibility simply because humans are in that room, and it's unpredictable what's going to happen.
Yeah. And Leslie, my wife, is a public school teacher, and she describes a child's education as a quilt. So, quote unquote good teacher, bad teacher, strict teacher, easy teacher, like they end up no matter what your journey is, creating a vast tapestry which you can you know, plumb and draw upon and reflect back on, and there's all kinds of twists and turns, and it becomes part of the story of the kid's education experience. That idea I find incredibly stress relieving. Because it doesn't mean every year you got to have the right teacher and figure out, make sure that they're doing the right project and with the right kid. You can't lean in that much. You got to sort of lean back a little bit. Or I'm feeling like I'm noticing I need to. That's the growth for me, is learning how to lean back.
Yeah, for me, school is like it's a pre. We don't go to church. We don't have a ton of friends. We don't have a lot of family around. School is kind of a community you can just plug into. It's like all these, and the thing that unites you is you send your kids to this building for 7 hours a day, you know? And that's what kind of unites you. And so for me, it's like, it's just been a lot less malevolent than when I was, but before I had kids and I was all worried about school and sending them to school, it's been more benevolent than I thought it would be. But I also have I have one kid that's really good at school. And another kid that's really good at school, too. He's just not quite as... Actually, they're both really good at school, so it's easy for them. So that's a whole different thing when school is easy. Like, it's almost kind of... In some ways, I think both my kids think school is a waste of their time.
Huh.
And that doesn't mean that their teachers aren't good. It doesn't mean that, like, the people... I just think they both kind of think school is a waste of time.
And it does create the idea that I think is true, which is now you're in charge of your own education. I mean, you take what you can get, and then you learn on your own, and because you have everything at your fingertips, you can.
That's what I try to tell my kids, is that you're in charge of your education. You are the one that leads it. And, you know, your teacher's going to give you these worksheets or whatever, but you're ultimately going to be the one that has to push yourself where you need to be.
I'm going to ask you one last question on this book. We'll go to your next book. I want to ask you about drawing, which specifically, why should adults get back into drawing and how should they do it? Because on page 102, she writes, most people eventually at some point in their life feel bad at art and never draw again, except for on the margins of pages or on the covers of telephone books, that thing we call doodling. A lot of people still do that when they are taking notes or listening to someone or waiting for someone to come back to the phone. Have you ever wondered why? What is the reason for it? I believe it's because it helps us maintain a certain patient state of mind, and there is a part of us which has never forgotten this. Talk to me. You are a writer who draws. That's how you describe yourself in your bios. I'm an adult who does not draw, but used to love drawing as a kid, like the people she's talking about. Yeah. Talk to me about the voyage from adult who doesn't draw to adult who does. How do we get back into it? What are some of the reasons? How should we think about introducing drawing back into our adult lives? For those of us, I think I speak for the majority, that no longer do it, but certainly see it as a loved joy for kids.
Well, I mean, I just think drawing is a pleasant experience. I mean, and I think that's what Linda is so good at, is showing that you don't go to the page to get a drawing. You go to the page to draw, to have an experience, to do something. Like, when I go on a bike ride, it's not like at the end I'm like, I have this bike ride, check out this bike ride. You know what I mean? Like, I go on a bike ride to ride my bike. And it should be the same thing with drawing. You go to drawing to draw and to look and to see and to make marks. And it's pleasurable. Now, I will say that one of the things that's really, I think there's different kinds of drawing. That's one thing you have to understand, is that there's picture writing, which is kind of what comics are, which is like expressing inner, telling a story or something like that. That's one kind of drawing where you're kind of trying to communicate something. You're trying to there's a message, or you're trying to tell a story, or you're trying to, your kid says, I want a picture of a snake. And you're like, okay, well, the snake, that's one kind of drawing. That's like a representative kind of drawing. The other kind of drawing is that you're trying to focus on the world and look at the world and slow down long enough that you can somewhat accurately represent it on a piece of paper. Those are different things. Like when you're making a comic or you're trying to draw for your kids, a lot of times that's just that's like it's like shapes. You're trying to, and that's one kind of drawing, and that's a beautiful, wonderful kind of drawing. And then there's this other kind of drawing where the point is to try to look at the world. And so those have different benefits. I mean, there's pleasure in both kinds of drawings, but there's different kinds of drawing. And the one, it's a way to communicate with people in a way that it becomes, it's a superpower. If you can write words and draw pictures, you've got two different modes of communication at your disposal instead of just one. So that's one thing. Dan Rome's really good at this, the writer.
How do you spell Rome?
Dan Rome, R-O-A-M.
Okay.
He teaches business people how to draw. So, use drawing in the corporate boardroom and stuff to sell ideas to people. But the other kind of drawing is being awake and alive to your world and slowing down long enough to see what's in front of you. And that's the drawing that really, really... That's not even necessarily the drawing that Linda teaches, but that's a different kind of drawing that I think is the most beneficial because you really don't know what something looks like until you try to draw it. Like if I asked you right now to draw a bicycle.
Yeah, I would draw two circles, a stick between them, and a stick at the top with a handlebar on it.
Yeah.
I'd probably stop there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it wouldn't. Most people couldn't draw a bicycle, even as a diagram, even as a schematic. They couldn't actually draw a bicycle how it works. I can draw you a bicycle because I know how a bicycle works, and so I know all the parts, but I've also spent time drawing bicycles, and I know how they, you know what I mean? So It forces you realize how much you don't look at things when you draw.
What's the easiest way for someone who doesn't draw today, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, who is hearing your message and hearing Linda's message, understanding that it can be very therapeutic? I'm kind of with you on all the logics that I still don't do. What do I need to do? Surround myself with cue cards and markers? Like, what is it? Is it a before bed practice? Is it like draw something that you see out your window? What are some of the ways that people can get back into this practice that sounds quite positive?
Because this is a podcast about books. There are two books that are for the different kinds of drawing. The best book for the kind of symbol picture writing we're talking about is Ed Emberley's Make a World, which is a book that literally shows you how step by step you can draw a stick figure, or here's how you draw a car, here's how you draw a boat, like
a triangle plus a circle plus a square, that
exactly.
Kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
Here are the five. If you can draw a triangle and a square and a circle and a dot and a line, you can draw all the things in this book. That's the book to get if you have like kids, or you just want to do symbol writing and you just want to learn how to like draw things.
Okay, say the title one more time.
The title is Ed Emberley's drawing book.
Okay.
Make a World, and there are a million of them. Ed Emberley is incredible. And they're for kids, but they're for anyone really. And these are great.
I can
if you're
picture
a
them
parent.
in our house from the library. Actually,
if you're a parent, that's the perfect book to use with your kids.
Okay.
As an adult and you're trying to learn to draw, the book to read is Betty Edwards' classic Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, which is all about when people start drawing, they draw what they think should be there rather than what's there. And so that book is about really looking. And so she has all these different, techniques. Like one of the techniques is to turn a picture upside down and draw it. draw something upside down.
Oh,
Because the minute you turn something upside down, you don't know what it is, and you have to really draw what's in front of you. So just like little tips like that. There's a writer named Sam Anderson who just taught himself to draw during the pandemic. And he writes features for the New York Times
Is he
magazine.
the guy that wrote Boomtown?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that book about Oklahoma City.
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
Sam's become a friend of mine, and he's one of my favorite working writers. But Sam has literally made his way. That's what he did through the pandemic, is he went through Betty Edwards' book.
Wow.
So those are the two books but they're different. I would say the Ed Emberley book is drawing on the left side of the brain, in that it's mainly about symbols and representation and almost drawing as a form of language. And then Betty Edwards, drawing on the right side of the brain, is more about like actually drawing what's in front of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You are so good at pointing out all these resources, like you seem to draw upon from everywhere. Like you say, of course, and you're just like, flicking your wrist as if we've all heard of these. I've never heard of any of these books. This is so wonderful.
My mind is, I cannot remember things that happened to me. I can't tell you, like, if we had gone someplace and had dinner together or something, I probably couldn't tell you where we went after that or whatever. I'd have to have my wife fill in the details or something like that. Meg would have to tell you, like, whatever. I can remember things I read, and I can remember movies and song lyrics and stuff like that. I can remember all that stuff. So I do have like kind of I sometimes wonder if I'm borderline like autistic, in that the sense that I have an incredible visual. I can pull things up, like a file system.
Yeah,
that's just something weird that
not weird. Temple Grandin told us in this show that she said I think in pictures, and her famous book is called Thinking in Pictures.
Yeah, Thinking in Pictures. When she's talking about that in the beginning of that book, that's a lot how I work. Now, what's really interesting is my wife has aphantasia. And what that is that she doesn't see pictures in her head. She can't form images in her mind. So it's the opposite of what Temple Grandin is talking about.
You guys are a good fit.
Yeah.
Together you remember everything.
Well, I mean, it's different. It's different. It's taken us a life, we've almost lived half our lives together now, and it's taken us this long to realize that we fundamentally see things differently. I mean, we really do. It's not like, oh, what a nice metaphor. We all see the world differently. No, we don't just see the world differently, we think differently. So that's, when you live with the example I like to use with people, which I never know if it lands or not, is when we're rearranging a room, when we're trying to get the furniture right in a room, she will want to try something, and I'll say, that's never going to work. That won't fit there. Because I can see the thing and I can see I'm like, that's not going to work there. A lot of times I'm right. What happens, though, is that she has to push things around the room. And if I leave her alone, like if I go on a trip or something, I'll come back and the whole room will be rearranged. And it'll be in this brilliant way that no one else would have arranged the room, because she took the trouble to push things around and try things. That's the superpower of a person with aphantasia, is they don't get hung up by what's in their head. They have to try things. And so I think people with aphantasia have a great lesson for all people. And you find this with all people with differences and disabilities, that if you study a disability or a difference, there's always lessons in there for people of all kinds. The same way that if you design the world with disabilities in mind, for example, for people who have a hard time getting around or whatever, the world gets better when you design for that thing. So for me, it's like she just has taught me this great lesson, which is, if you've ever watched the movie Amadeus, like the Mozart's agent or his friend who wants to put on a play says, it's no good to anyone in your head, Mozart. It's all right up here in my noodle. It's like, well, it's no good to anyone there. And that also jams people up, because a lot of people can see what they want to do, but they don't have the ability to do it on the page. And so their perfectionism jams them up. They'd be better off in some ways if they didn't have a picture in their mind and they just started sketching.
Huh. This is great. I want to know. No, I'm loving it. And then right behind you, there's a big long-tailed grackle flying towards us with a shimmery kind of blue head. The patio,
it's now 93 degrees outside.
The patio is cleared. The lunchtime is over. The truck is pulled away, and we are tipping back into your third and final book, which is The Journal of Henry David Thoreau by Henry David Thoreau.
Abridged,
I should say. Even though it's, let me see here.
It's pretty long.
667 pages. Published in 1984 by Peregrine Smith Books, and now published by the University of Princeton Press, who also publishes his full journal. The cover depicts flattened leaves and the small branches of plants in yellows and greens, and the center has a yellow box with the simple title, The Journal, 1837 to 1861 in green, and Henry David Thoreau's name in red. Right below that says, preface by John R. Stilgoe, Cilgoe. Henry David Thoreau was born in 1817 in Concord, Massachusetts, died sadly at age 44, I believe of tuberculosis, 1862 in Concord, Massachusetts. He's an American naturalist, essayist, poet, philosopher, and transcendentalist. Did I say that right? Best known for his book Walden and his essay Civil Disobedience. Henry David Thoreau's journal was his life's work, the daily practice of writing that accompanied his daily walks, the workshop where he developed his books and essays, and a project in its own right. One of the most intensive explorations ever made of the everyday environment, the revolving seasons, and the changing South. File this one to be decimal under 818.303 for literature/English/author/middle 19th century from 1830 to 1861. Austin, tell us about your relationship with the Journal of Henry David Thoreau.
Well, I've actually never read Walden, which everyone thinks is hilarious because I'm a huge Thoreau fan. So I avoided Thoreau for most of my life. I didn't get to Thoreau till I was like 35.
So it wasn't an active avoidance.
No, it was an active avoidance. I literally stayed away from Thoreau because I couldn't stand the people who I thought read Thoreau. So I have never been a naturalist. I've never been interested in... I think that's changing rapidly, but when I was growing up, I really considered myself an indoors person. Like, I was not interested in nature or anything crunchy. That John Krakauer...
You mentioned no football, no sports, right? I mean,
right, like, but that's one thing. But, like, the whole, like Grizzly Man or Into Thin Air, all that REI shopping, people camping, stuff like that, I just could not be more interested in that. And part of the reason I picked this book is Thoreau ended up being such a formative writer for me, and it was really that kind of thing where I had avoided this guy my whole life because the cultural narrative about him, I had kind of absorbed that narrative instead of actually reading him. And so when I'm trying to think of, I think the first thing that happened, I don't think I read the journal first. I read a biography of Thoreau by this woman named Laura Walls, and I started reading it and I was like, all right, this dude lives with his parents. He's overeducated. He's really upset about the government. He loves plants. I mean, this dude sounds like every millennial I know, basically. So I was like, this is just... this is extremely relatable stuff. And, when I started reading Thoreau, I thought, this is just a guy who trained himself to see the world in a grain of sand, like William Blake says. I mean, this guy could...
What do you mean by that?
Well... So what's interesting to me about Thoreau is that everything people think is some kind of gotcha about Thoreau is actually a crucial, essential fact, makes him even more interesting. So, for example, one of the things people always bitch about is Walden's he was a mile away from his house. He wasn't living in the wilderness.
So for those that don't know, he lived at Walden Pond for a couple of years on a self-made kind of parcel of land.
His buddy Emerson owned this land.
Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Yeah, and Thoreau built this little cabin on... It'd be like if your buddy was go build a cabin on my little ranch or whatever, But he was really only a mile away from his house. He wasn't that far outside of town. But it was his attempt to live deliberately, is what he called it. But to me, this makes it all the more splendid that he was able to find this whole natural world and this universe right in his damn backyard. Now, the other thing that people bitch about with Thoreau is that his mom did his laundry, or his mom brought him food or whatever. And the great case that, Laura Wallace says, nowhere in American literature has a man ever been, crucified for not doing his own laundry or spending time with his family. She's like, this is absurd. None of the men that you read from this time period ever did their own laundry or anything, But part of the problem is that people don't... Now, I haven't read Walden. Walden's very preachy. Walden is very, it's a different kind of language. He's speaking in, a kind of elevated... I mean, I've read parts of Walden. I haven't read the entire... The Journal is a guy working things out.
Presumably not for publication at the time.
Well, I mean, so you've talked to the other David, who works a lot like this David.
David Sedaris.
David Sedaris and David Thoreau, because he switched Henry David.
His name really is David.
Right.
Yeah.
They actually worked in a very similar way. They have this diary that they go on little adventures.
Yep.
Thoreau walked for 4 hours a day,
right.
tromping around.
Yep. Sedaris is doing
Sedaris
9.
does the same thing.
Yeah.
And then they come back and they write about it. So what they both do is they work out stuff in their diary.
It goes from the walk to the diary.
It goes from the walk to the diary, or the life to the diary, whatever. And then the diary becomes a lecture or something read aloud to an audience.
Exactly how David Sedaris says it. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the lectures become a book.
Right.
They're basically working the same way. So
Right.
in some ways, reading Thoreau's diary and David Sedaris' diary at the same time kind of blew things open for me, because it just was this it's like, oh, okay, I can have this. I explicitly started keeping a diary in 2017.
You have a yellow small, is it a moleskin?
This is not my diary.
Oh, it's not?
No.
Okay.
This is my pocket notebook.
Okay.
My diary looks like a Bible, basic. It's like Bible size. It's like or not that thick, maybe. It's probably...
So what's the difference between a notebook and a diary?
Well, a notebook is... Oh, what is the difference for me?
Yeah, well, you've got a
this
picture of
is just
R2-D2
random stuff. This
okay.
is this is just, I have this on me to take notes
okay,
and
so
whatever.
That's to take notes. The diary is to...
the diary is to literally sit down and I do, like Linda, I have a paintbrush, I have a little brush pen, and I write the date, and I look through my notebook, and I have another thing called a logbook, which is like an appointment book in reverse, where I just write down what happens to me every day, because I don't remember what happens to me. And then I look through my logbook, I look through my diary, sometimes I look at, or my pocket notebook, sometimes I look at Twitter or like my blog or something, and then I write down I figure out what I want to write about in the diary. I probably only fill 2 or 3, 4 pages each morning. But those pages accumulate, and then usually what I come up with in the diary often becomes a blog post or a newsletter. And then when it's time to do a book, a lot of those blog posts and newsletters, they become a book chapter. Right? So it's just like,
what
it's
happens
the same.
after book? Is book the end state?
Well, it's weird, because the book then becomes usually like a series of talks or something, but then the book kind of... That's a good question. I mean, the book is what it is, but then usually what happens is after the book comes out, there's all this new writing from stuff I figured out after the book. So
there's something else cyclical in there probably for other people that read your books. Maybe they get their own thoughts in their own diaries and their own notebooks.
Yeah. I mean, a book, I believe, is a crystallization of thought in a particular moment in time.
Wow. A book is a crystallization of thought in a particular moment of time.
Yeah. A book has, because it has a publication date, I really hate Leaves of Grass by Whitman, because I love it. I hate the fact that he just kept redoing the book. It drives me nuts as a reader, because, and this is just my own self. I appreciate the project, and I appreciate what it says about books and literature. The fact that he's just remaking this thing over and over, and it's getting whatever. I hate that there isn't one artifact I can go to, because I like the artifactiness of a book. I like the fact that it's a moment in time. I don't actually like updated books that much. Like when Steal Like an Artist came out, I really didn't want to change much in the book, because I was just like, why would I change what this book essentially is and what it does for people. Like so that's why I decided to do an afterword instead of like an introduction or anything. Because I felt like
10-year anniversary of See Like an Artist just came out. Wonderful book. Everybody should get it. Everybody should read it. I got a copy here right beside me. And you're saying when it came out in 10 years, you didn't want to mess with it because it was a moment in time.
Yeah, like the afterword felt very much like the way I could, that's the way I could leave it the easiest. Because even in introduction, you're disrupting the flow of the book. Like the book, you open the book and it goes. And it's like, bam.
I feel the same way about dedications. It's a weird thought, but I don't have dedications in any of my books for that same reason. But wait, so you kind of mentally had dismissed Thoreau growing up. You thought yourself as an indoorsman. Right. He was more of an outdoorsman. Right. You bump into this Laura Wells biography of Thoreau somehow, because that, by the way, I bought it on your recommendation. It's a thick, meaty book. Like, not many people just stumble into an 800-page biography.
Well, that was my friend Levi Stahl, who runs marketing for University of Chicago Press. It was his book, like that came out from them, and he was pimping it on Twitter, and he was like, you got to read this, and sent me a copy.
So you read that book, it tipped you off to Thoreau, and then you chose to start not with his most popular work, which would be Walden, but you rather traced it back and bought the journal, his journals.
So I'm trying to think of how I got to the journal. Well, one of the reasons, John Stilgoe, who did the preface for this, he wrote a beautiful book called Outside Lies Magic, which he's the perfect person to write the intro to that, because Outside Lies Magic is John Stilgoe's book about getting outside and exploring your urban environment and the weird spaces. He's a real proponent of like following power lines and seeing where they go, and like going to easements and finding like weird retention ponds and like stuff all over the built environment. So he's the perfect person to write this. But so then I just so the way I read this is the other reason it means so much to me. I read this, I've never read it straight through. What I do is when I'm in the process of reading it, which I'm not right now, I've lapped it twice. I've read that book twice.
It's a 24-year book. He wrote it from age 20 to age 44.
So what I did is I put sticky notes, little Post-it flags on each year, the date that approximated today. And I read it throughout a year as like a daily read. Now, there are books where you can do that. There are books that people put out.
Yeah.
But I did it myself, and what I did was I read, it's May 17th, so I read every entry in that book that was on May 17th, I read on May 17th. Now, what's incredible about that is he repeats himself over and over. He's like, oh, the birds, the robins came out today. And it's like, 4 years later, he's like, the robins came out today, whatever it is. He repeats himself over and over, and you realize he really is the great American chronicler of the seasons, because that is how he's just deeply attuned to his environment, and he's like the micro seasons and the kind of the things that happen. He's just over and over and over. Now, the other fun thing about the journal that not a lot of people know is there are all these doodles and sketches in the journal that the New York Review of Books, who put this out, have been really good at reproducing. But he's, Thoreau is sort of like...
So, how did this change you? What changed about you? You read this in 2017, so 5 years ago-ish.
Well, Thoreau is he's privileged in a sense that he's a white guy and
went to Harvard.
Whatever. He went to Harvard, but Harvard didn't have the reputation it had now, back then. Harvard was kind of more of a crazy, it was a little bit wilder than now. But, he's pretty well cared for. But he's sort of he writes a lot about attention, and that's one reason he's really interesting to read now, because Thoreau's kind of feeling is that the world is trying to distract him from what he's truly interested in, which is his immediate environment. Like, what he's really interested in is like trying to get a groundhog to let him pet him, or something, like your squirrels, or like
why
flowers,
the blossoms
or whatever.
are so pink.
Exactly. Or
he's the color of the sunset.
What's the temperature of Walden Pond at this? He's very deeply interested in his extremely local environment, and he feels very much that the news and the media of the time is taking him away from this life. And he feels that a good life is one in which he's paying attention to his local universe rather than whatever's going on.
Right.
So you can see how in 2017, this is a book for me where I'm like, this dude has it figured out. Like, he has figured out how to pay hyper-local attention to his world and stay focused and not let himself be kind of caught up in what's going on in the wider world. You know, he talks about, there's a certain point in the diary where he says, you know, this weekly paper I get, I don't have time to read this weekly paper.
Yeah. He says, read not the times, read the eternities.
Yeah, and he's very much like, but he literally, right now, reading the weekly paper seems to me like that would be a really good media diet, actually. That would be a really good news diet. Like, if you just read, like, a weekly paper.
It's a lot slower than the 15 time a day.
That'd probably be enough, actually, for you. For Thoreau, it was too much. So it's like, you know, it's very interesting.
But you're biking a lot more now. You're taking a lot long walks.
Oh, yeah.
He's kind of, I'm assuming he's kind of inched you closer to being an outdoors person.
Well, both Thoreau and Sedaris taught me that what I realized is it's not like these jokers went out and had all these great epiphanies and then came back and like, oh, you know, I have this great memory I'll write about. They're all scribbling in a notebook all day. Thoreau's got a notebook with him. David Sedaris has a little piece of paper in his pocket. He's scribbling things down. Yeah. It's not like these dudes have, you know, like whatever. So, like, for me, it just made what it did, what reading Thoreau and getting to know Sedaris's method, what they did for me is show me a repeatable way of working indefinitely.
Ooh, interesting.
You set up systems in which you're never devoid of material because you're constantly writing. You're doing stuff all the time. And the real trick becomes how you go back through this stuff and present it in a way that you could do something with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was really...
Neither of them actually ended up figuring out how to turn it off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, some artists eventually get to a place like, you know, Alice Munro is still alive, and she's been very publicly and said, "I'm done writing now."
Yeah,
you know,
I mean,
I think I've had enough of that.
But you know, it's like, it's interesting though because nothing anyone says about Thoreau is wrong. You know, it's not that they're wrong; they just miss the point. I mean, like, what is also really interesting to me is, you know, I consider myself I consider myself a feminist, and I consider myself a very passionate. I read a lot of women. I make a point to read a lot of women. What is really interesting to me is when feminists come at Thoreau, or people who think they're being feminists come at Thoreau, oh, these are this whatever, because actually some of the great champions of Thoreau have been these feminist superheroes like Virginia Woolf or Rebecca Solnit. You know, these people that like got, you know, or Gandhi, you know, like these, or Martin Luther King or whatever. These people
these
who
are all
read
people
Thoreau,
who have been influenced.
Yeah, these are all people that have read Thoreau. And so when people try to come at Thoreau from this like modern contemporary perspective, where they're like, well, his mom did his laundry and he never really left home, he's just some privileged white guy and whatever, it's like, it's really hilarious to me because when you think about what he was doing at the time, the stones it took to kind of like, you know, to make that kind, I just find him deeply relatable. And maybe that's because I'm like I am who I am, but for me it's like I just love him. And I also love that he's kind of a prick. You know, people are always like, oh, he's so... And it's interesting because if you read the diary, he's like, when he's young, it's kind of unbecoming. Like when you meet young people who are kind of cranky, it's like, what are you cranky about? You've got the body of a 17-year-old and you're free and you can do whatever you want. What are you cranky about? Thoreau grows into his crankiness. As he ages, his crankiness gets more like earned and deeper, and I love that about him. But he's like this guy that really taught me, I'd say the primary thing, you know, there's a couple of things I learned from Thoreau. Like, the one is you go out and walk and then you come back and write about it. That's basic. That's just for a writer, you go out in the world, you have a little adventure, and you come back and write about it. Whatever you thought about, you take notes, come back and write about it. The other thing I learned is I don't want to curse. Try fucking reading someone before you have an opinion about them. Like this is bad. We're at a moment now in the culture where it's just like people have opinions about people that they don't even know anything about. Mm-hmm. And it's not, I'm not like, it's just that point is which, why don't you try reading someone before you make these generalizations, before you get into this. So if you want to drive me crazy, and everyone knows this now, like mention Thoreau's laundry. Like it just drives me up. It drives me insane because it's just really missing the point. And I mean, there's a lot of other things. I think as an American, it's really, there's a Thoreauvian economics too that's really interesting. I mean, one of his great lines is, "Beware of endeavors that require new clothing." He what Thoreau writes about is that all labor has a cost. There's a cost to work. It costs you something to work. Like you get money from working, but it costs you to work. And that's like another one of his points. He just like he's a great, he's one of the great American philosophers.
The walking thing is so interesting. I think you and I are both big fans of these long walks. I did a YouTube video once called "The Life-Changing Magic of the 5-Hour Walk," and he would go out for a long walk every afternoon, equipped with an array of instruments: his hat for specimen collecting, a heavy book to press plants, a spyglass to watch birds, his walking stick to take measurements, and small scraps of paper for jotting down notes. What are your ingredients for a good walk?
Oh, I'm much simpler. I mean, I actually don't walk with anything other than my iPhone.
Well, that's an interesting thing right there on the phone.
People are sort of like, "Oh, you don't bring your notebook with you?" I'm like, no, because it's too much bulk. It's like the iPhone is there for pictures, because I love taking pictures. Mm-hmm. And the Notes app on the iPhone, I think, is one of the most underrated tools.
Say more about that.
Period.
Why?
Because if you have iCloud set up,
yes,
I'm a Mac guy, so I have all Mac stuff, like any other nerd, and like everything I type on my phone immediately goes up in the cloud, and it's there at my computer when I sit down.
Right.
So it's just like this ultimate notebook thing that's searchable and whatever. But so that's
how do you
the
not
only
get
thing
distracted? I mean, when I take my phone with me on walks, I try not to take my phone with me, or I leave it on airplane mode or off in my backpack. I find that I end up slipping into. You also tweet 10 to 15 times a day. Should be said. Like you're also pretty active online at the same time.
I don't really. I mean, for one thing, I walk with another person. I walk with Meg. So like, I don't really.
You're not like texting.
I'm not texting people. No. I mean, it's also discipline. I just don't like. I don't know. Sometimes I don't worry about distraction as much as I used to, because I have these systems in my life that make sure that I get things done. I'm just not that much of a. I've kind of trained myself in a way that I don't really have to worry about it that much. I'm not that compulsive about social media and Twitter like I used to be. So I just don't worry about it. It's interesting
you say that, because I see you as someone who's just online so much more than me. I don't mean that compulsively, but just like I'm trying to get social media out of my life completely. That would be my goal. My end goal on social media would be not to have it.
Well, I mean, I use social media in a very particular way as a public notebook. What I do is I use it it's a research tool. What I do is I post things, and then I see how people respond to them, if there's anything interesting. It's like fishing. It's like throwing out a bait or something. It's like a lure. See if you can learn something. I mean, of course, it's also a marketing tool. It's like, hey, I'm still here, kind of thing. But one of the things I use social media so much for is that it's an open notebook, and then I go back to it. I don't think people realize, if you read my newsletter on Friday, most of that comes straight from the Twitter feed, because I collect things all week, and if it's good enough to tweet, it's probably might make a good point in the newsletter. So I'm using Twitter like a diary or a notebook. Right. And that's a different form of using social media than, having your Hootsuite set to pimp out your book every whatever. So like for me, I'm still interested in the back and forth of social media in a sense. But for me, it's just like a really convenient way to... It's a really convenient way to keep track of what you're paying attention to. And one of the things about like social media is that you have to sort of craft it. You kind of have to have a point. So there has to be like kind of a point to a tweet for me. So like you craft it, you edit it, you like get it, and it might only take you 10 or 15 seconds, but like you kind of craft the thought. And in the act of crafting the thought, in that you're going to have someone listen to it, that's an act of writing. I think one of the things for me is that I've never been someone who felt like Twitter was little writing and the books were big writing. I was like, I don't think that way. For me, small writing could lead to I've had great insights from single tweets and someone responding to it, So for me, I think part of the thing is I use social media the way that that you're just like hanging out in a coffee shop and you're like, what about this thing? And people are like, oh no, that's stupid.
Move on to the next one.
Have you read this thing? Well, you're obviously missing this, or whatever. But yeah, it's a public notebook. That's how I use it. That's how the people I really look up to on social media use it. It's like a writer's open notebook.
Okay, exactly. 1837, Thoreau's third ever entry so he's 20 years old. His third ever entry reads, "Every part of nature teaches that the passing away of one life is the making room for another. The oak dies down to the ground, leaving within its rind a rich virgin mold, which will impart a vigorous life to an infant forest. So this constant abrasion and decay makes the soil of my future growth. As I live now, so shall I reap." I thought I would ask how you think about that decaying and growth within yourself.
Well, I don't know by myself, but one of the things that Thoreau figures out really quickly, which much to his good use, is that nature provides you almost all of the metaphors you need for talking about any kind of life. He's part of the writers. Robin Kimmerer writes about this really well in Braiding Sweetgrass. She says, she's a metaphorager in the sense that she's looking for, as a writer, you're looking for metaphors all the time. And nature just ends up being like a rich one. But this process of like decay and life and cycles and stuff, it's just so antithetical to the way we talk in modern life because now I think we're getting a little bit better, but, especially in the self-help area, like Tim Ferriss is paying for this right now. Like Tim, it's interesting to watch. Tim's a guy that got very famous. I don't know Tim personally, but Tim's a guy that got very...
He's a fellow resident here.
Yeah, he lives around here somewhere. Tim is a guy that got very popular helping people try to figure out how to optimize themselves.
The 4-hour work week, 2007.
Yeah, like optimization, becoming the perfect
life hacking.
Life hacking, all that
lifestyle
stuff.
Lifestyle design.
Yeah. And that sort of assumes that, and now it's interesting watching him kind of go, he's growing and developing and dealing with that and like what the repercussions of that are. And so that's kind of interesting to me from afar to see that kind
What's
of thing.
happening?
What's happening to him?
Yeah. When you say,
I just think he's going deeper and discovering that it's not about being like a robot, efficient, like ultimate dude. He's just figuring out that that's like a very like that's one way of looking at the world. That's very Western and very like
productivity
capitalist
oriented.
in a sense. This idea that you can optimize things for maximum
virtual
efficiency.
Assistant, everything that you don't want to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
okay.
But what nature, using nature as a metaphor, it's just like you realize that things are much more nonlinear and cyclical than they're presented to you. Like think about America. You
posted about the calendar, the circle calendar. I remember you posting about.
Well, I just think like this is another way that Thoreau is kind of pushing back against America, is that and when I say America, I mean the United States. He's really like even then, there's this myth of progress, that we're going forward, like, and even he can see that that's like a dead end, this notion of forward motion, no matter what, is just like, there's nothing in nature that works that way. There's just literally nothing in nature that works that way. This doesn't happen. So it's unnatural, and so I think he's starting to see the roots of a system that's going to burn itself out, but he gets to that place by observing his environment. And the fun thing about, again, people get hung up on the wilderness thing. It's not they went to live in the wilderness. He just went far enough away from town that he could like observe things and not have people nattering in his ear all day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting about, one thing we both connect over is the moon. This podcast publishes on the lunar cycle.
Right, which I think is very cool.
Yeah, it only comes out on
clever.
the exact minute of every new moon and full moon. I always say to people, I don't trust the Gregorian calendar. The Pope came up with this 500 years ago. It presumes that time is linear. And the thing I was mentioning a second ago is I've seen you post about these idea of circle calendars and, just getting back into the seasons and nature being round as opposed to like numerically based. Anyway, it's been wonderful for me because the first couple of years of the podcast, here I am looking at the sky a lot more. And, at first it's anxiety provoking. I'm like, that moon's pretty full and I haven't recorded the next podcast. I've just put my calendar up in the sky, but then it becomes very relieving because it's just so, that thing's been there for 4 billion years. We've been using it as a way to count time for 35,000 years. Mm-hmm. You can presume that much time in the future. So then it just relieves you of any pressure that you feel about this moment. One of the things I do at my house is I collected 10 rocks from a beach on my 40th birthday, and I keep them on the counter in our bedroom. 4 of the rocks, I'm 42, are forward, and the other 6, I hope I'm going to live 10 decades, are backwards. And in my mind, every 10 years I move 1 rock forward. Oh. And the reason I like that little touchstone, literally, in my bedroom, especially, is because before I go to bed, I find I often get anxious. But now when I look at that little rock thing, I'm like, man, this is just... what a small part of the 10 years is this little thing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to move this rock for 8 more years.
It's deep time.
Deep time. The Long Now Project. That idea of the 10,000-year clock and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the tension of life, and this is kind of, one of the projects I'm working on is an idea that when we talk about tensions in life, we usually talk about them in terms of you want to resolve the tension. My theory is that the creative work comes out of the tension, being the tensions of life. That's the very stuff of life. And I use the metaphor of a guitar string.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
It's so funny you said that.
So if you play guitar, that a string it's in between 2 poles. It's wound around 2. You can make a guitar by just having 2 posts that are stationary, and then you wrap a wire or a string or whatever around it. If you don't tighten the string enough, it'll just buzz. It won't make any noise at all. If you tighten it too much, it snaps. So really, tuning a guitar and getting music out of tension is about the right tension, the proper tension. And so the ultimate tension of life is you're trying to live as if you might have 10 decades, but also that today might be it.
Yeah.
And that's a fundamental tension of life.
Yeah.
And it's nothing to resolve. You can't resolve it. It's unresolvable. It's in the tension that the meaning and purpose of life comes out of that tension. And so I would like to, one of the projects I'm working on right now, it might be a book, I don't know for sure, is I think there are particular creative tensions that in our culture have been, I use the word culture, I just mean in our whatever.
The sea we swim in, yeah.
What we do, what we talk about, we act as if these tensions are going to get resolved. And in my position is it's the very tension that makes.
Give us an example
life.
Of one.
Of course, now that I've said that, it's like what? Starting and finishing.
That's a great one. Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah.
That impulse to. When do you know you're beginning and ending.
It's even
right?
nice what you're talking about now in this project. I'm working on something now. Don't know if it's going to be a
I don't
book.
know.
You're just sitting in it, doing it, moving it around.
But, you know, like an interesting, one of my favorites is, the other thing you could do is when people say there are two kinds of people in the world, you can say, actually, those are just two tensions. So there's a art critic named Dave Hickey who said you're either a pirate or you're a farmer. A farmer finds a little plot and just tills it and just cultivates it and tills it, and it's the same plot. And he just kind of does his thing and gets the best yield he can get out of it. A pirate goes out and sails the seas and has a wild time, brings back all kinds of booty, you know. So he was talking about like different kinds of artists and makers. Some people have a plot and they cultivate it, and then other people are going all around borrowing and stealing and whatever. For me, they're not two types of people. It's two ways of being. There's times when you need to be the farmer and you need to cultivate what you have and work it and develop your crop.
Yeah.
And then there's times you need to hit the high seas and find new varieties and new plants and stuff and bring them back. You know, there's like in Master and Commander, there's a botanist on board. You know, Charles Darwin, he went on a ship and like he was a botanist. He brings all these specimens back. You know, so it's like just there are these the idea is that it's an ancient idea. It's Heraclitus' idea that there's a harmony of opposites. That there's that the world is created by opposites. And it's in a lot of the world religions. You know, yin and yang.
Yeah.
Good and evil.
Yeah.
You know.
Susan Cain's new book, Bittersweet.
Yes. So like this idea, though, I think you can teach people. Well, my theory is that this is just a completely different metaphor that will help people feel better about what they're dealing with. Because there's a great Viktor Frankl quote. He says, the purpose of life is not a tensionless state. He uses that word tension a lot in that quote that people like to quote. It's to find a meaning or a purpose, basically, you know. So, but the tension, my point is that creative people in particular are often feel pulled in between forces. And a lot of that creative energy comes from them grappling with these kind of opposing forces and finding a way to make that tension sing.
I love that. I love that for so many reasons. I also feel like in this world we're so, you know, 0 and 1s are powering almost everything that we see and do.
This is a spectrum.
The push, exactly.
Or a vibration or
It's gray. You know, everything ends up being 0 1. That means black or white. That means an algorithm feeds you a piece of content. You're dictated to, you know, everything is categorized and everything has, you know, a label, and this is right wing and this is left wing, and you know, this is trying to break through that, and it's very difficult to do that. We're trying our best to do it with the show, but it's a more difficult place to play and a more difficult place to sit in, and it's a more difficult place to wrestle with, because you also have to make yourself open to you mentioned earlier about books requiring work. Well, to play with tension requires you got to show up. You can't just passively sit on the couch watching Netflix. You got to like, if you're listening to this, your brain is clicking and on fire just like mine is right now, because listening to you is provoking so many ideas in my own head while listening to you. You know?
Yeah. I just feel, and this again, I might be giving away the fact I'm a Gemini. I constantly feel pulled between forces. I was trying to explain someone the other day.
Here comes Veronica, and she's like, "What? You guys have been talking for 2 hours
Get the hell out of here, both of you.
Let me give you a credit card, please." And this has been, by the way, we've enjoyed this guacamole for like an hour. It's changed colors in the sun. It's gone brown. And then we pick it away, and it turns green, and we pull it out. And do you want anything else? Want another taco or something? And those chicken enchiladas were unbelievable, the red and the green. Thank you. You're in the podcast. You're talking. You're here.
Thank you for coming.
No.
Madres all the time.
Ni madres all the time.
Ni madres all day.
What's the address here?
2201 Manor Road, Austin, Texas.
Okay, we're going to send people here when they
Come
listen
on
to
down.
this. And we're going to, this conversation could go on and on and on. You have given us a masterclass on curiosity, on creativity, on the artist life, on thinking like an artist as well as stealing like an artist. Austin, can we close this off with a few quick, fast money round questions? Lightning round questions. We're going to go quick here. Preferred format, hardcover, paperback, audio, or e?
Again, book different contexts. I like paperbacks for the pool. I love hardbacks for collecting.
I'm not picturing you like lying in like a one of those round inflatable things a lot reading.
Yeah.
Nice.
I mean, like, because I mean, part of the writer's job is to read, and I quickly realized, wait a minute, I can do this decadently. Like, I have this pool, because we put this pool, and I was like, I can come here and work, and it could be like decadent work.
Have you ever heard Quentin Tarantino talk about how he writes all of his movies? He writes a scene
by the pool,
sits in the pool for an hour thinking about it, goes and writes a scene, comes back to the pool. The pool is like a big ingredient.
Well, he has that scene in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood where like Leo DiCaprio has his like,
reciting his lines in
yeah,
there.
and so
So paperback for the pool. We can remember
paperback
that.
for the pool. Yeah. Hardback usually for like collectible stuff if I want. Audiobooks, very rare for me that I do an audiobook. Sometimes if someone really recommends an audiobook, but I don't like to listen to stuff, and I like to have my senses open. And if I'm going to listen to something, I like listening to podcasts, because I think podcasts are like easy ways to kind of like get to know an author quickly and like whether I might like the book. And
I'm similar to you on audio, but I take flack for it because there's a lot of people that are
people love audiobooks. Well, for one thing, people have commutes.
And
so the commute's a big deal. A lot of people like stationary bike or they're cooking. My wife listens to a lot of stuff because she cooks and listens to audiobooks. So, but audiobooks, you really aren't. That's not the way I read. I mean, I'm a very like, I can't pause and highlight and underline and stuff. And then ebook for fiction at night before I go to bed.
Oh, why ebook before bed?
Because the Kindle has, and I use a Kindle Paperwhite. It has a different kind of light than your phone. A couple of things. One, you don't have to have a light on. And I like the screen has a different kind of light. I forget what kind of light it is, but it's different than your phone. It's easier to go to sleep.
Yeah, it's not bright in your. It's not the type of light that prevents you from producing melatonin overnight, right? It's e-ink, I think it's called, or some version of that. How do you organize your books on your bookshelf?
Barely.
Purposefully that way?
Read
Sundoku?
Yeah. I mean, one of the problems is I don't really have a studio right now, so my books just take over most of the house. So there's just books everywhere.
Do you have any idea how many books you have? Are you one of these thousands and thousands of books?
I don't even know how many books. I wouldn't want to. I just don't think that way about. Yeah. I mean, we probably have.
We just interviewed Doug the bookseller on the show. He had 500,000 books.
Not that many, thank God. But yeah, too many.
What is your book lending policy?
Never. I never lend a book to anyone. If I'm going to give someone a book, I buy it for them, because if you lend a book, you're never going to see it again. I mean, people. I've heard so many people. I gave a friend Steal Like an Artist, and I never saw it again, so I had to buy another copy. I was like, great. But like, yeah, I'd never lend
Dan
books.
Pink has a joke in his keynote speech. I've had a chance to see a couple times. He's like, here's my book. You don't gotta read it. Don't feel like you need to read it. But you do. I'd love you to buy it. He always makes that joke. He's like,
I mean, that's the joke about authors is they really don't care if you read their book. They just want you to buy it. But
there's a stand-up comical that says like,
just
put it on YouTube. Put my thing on YouTube and then just leave it. Just
I
don't touch it.
I have to say, like, books as gifts, I'm more wary of these days. Like, what I don't want a book to be is an obligation. I think it's really bad form to give someone a book and then say, "Did you read that book I gave you?"
Yeah.
No people send me books all the time, and I try to remind people, like, you send me the book because you want me to look at it, but like, I might not read it right away. I might read it in 3 years, but honestly, that's when you want me. I mean, I could, so reading is very personal for me.
Yeah,
it's very.
It should be. It is for everybody.
So yeah.
Okay. Do you have a white whale book or a book you have been chasing the longest?
To read?
In any metaphorical sense.
I would like to read some of the great classics. Like, I'd love to read Don Quixote. I'd love to read Tristram Shandy. The big one I'm going to attempt next is, I read Ian McGilchrist's The Master and His Mystery, which is about right, left hemisphere in the brain.
Oh, interesting.
And I read that a couple of years ago. Loved it. I think it's really influential on Linda, actually, that book. And his next book is out. It's called The Matter with Things. It's 1,400 pages and 2 700-page hardcovers.
How do you have the time to
So I'm going to do that.
How do you carve it out? For everyone that's listening, that's always like, I don't have time. Are you one of these people like our mutual friend Ryan Holiday that's like, it's your job, it's your homework? Like, are you one of these people, or are you just squeaking in pages here and there throughout the day?
No,
you're also very online. You're very digital.
I'm not as disciplined as Ryan. I don't know many people who are, really. For me, writing, it kind of has to be contextual. So, like, I try to match reading to, like, a time of day.
Right.
So, like, I read at the kitchen table when I'm eating. And then I read in the pool after I get the kids from school. And then I read at night before I go to bed. And those are, like, my big reading times. And otherwise, I don't really read that much outside of those times. But
they add up.
They add up over time.
57% of Americans read 0 books in the past year.
Well, that makes sense.
57%. So if you read,
that's been...
If you read 2 pages a day, you read 3 books a year, that's still way ahead. That's the time you studied 2018.
I mean, I read that statistic when I was pretty young. And it's something I say to writers all the time. I say, you got to understand, everybody watches TV. I mean, statistically, you pick this medium, you're literally half of your country doesn't mess with this medium.
The only thing worse is poetry.
Well, yeah. No, I mean, there's no... Poetry's really instructive,
I mean, in terms of size of commercial audience.
I mean, poetry's really instructive, though, because poets, there's never really been any money in poetry. So the lives of the poets are always real interesting because they have to figure out how to exist or what to do. And there's always a lot of shenanigans. There's someone like Rilke who's like sleeping with all these different women to try to stay, and then there's someone like William Carlos Williams or Wallace Stevens or, you could basically 20th century poetry is day jobs. Even T.S. Eliot up until a certain point. So I always...
Even Walt Whitman.
Yeah, I always
There's a reason that he has the first ever blurb on Leaves of Grass, because he had to market the hell out of it.
Well, and he made up his own... he reviewed his own book. That's what... yeah, so, like, the lives of the poets are really instructive, because poetry is, like... It's so impossible. Mm-hmm. A poet's life is almost, like... I don't know, poets are really interesting to me. I mean, that's what I wanted to do when I was younger.
Stand-up comedy is kind of like that a little bit.
Yeah.
Until you make it, then all you do is try to make sure you don't feel like you made it, so you can still be good at it.
So you can still, like, find material and stuff.
It's like Pete Holmes and Sarah Silverman talking about how you got to take the bus.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
So that's something that this comes full circle. The guy I got in a fight with the other day about the importance of travel, and he was saying, well, if you go to a resort or a cruise, you're wasting your time. You need to be like, renting a Airbnb in Mexico City, live in the real world or whatever. I said, most Americans, if they wanted to live in the real world, they should take the bus on the other side of town. That's the real world. Like, you'll learn more. And he's like, well, those people don't have as much to teach you as people in other cultures. I'm like, au contraire, sir. Like, because when you see some dude who can barely walk, he's getting on the bus to go to the grocery store, you think there's nothing to learn from that guy? So it's like stuff like that. I've always been, I think all Americans should be forced to take public transportation once a week. It would be really good for them. Their politics would change. They would be more grateful for what they have.
It's true. We're all incubating ourselves in Ubers. We're all becoming the solo. And if you get in and you talk to the Uber driver and they talk to you, that's a bonus, because usually you're both listening to your own thing. You get in, they're on the phone, you're on the phone.
Yeah, sure.
It's like a misconnection.
Yeah.
Well, one more book and then the closing question. What's your favorite bookstore, living or dead?
Favorite bookstore? Ooh, what is my favorite bookstore? I mean, I have a lot of bookstores I love in town. I mean, at this point, it's probably, I don't know. I gotta say, I love libraries more than bookstores. I don't feel, bookstores, I love them. They're very close to me. My heart will always, first and foremost, be at the library, because the library is really where I started my reading life. And that's...
You came out of college, you were a reference librarian in Ohio.
Yeah, but even as a little kid, that's where books came from in the beginning. They came from, like, the public library, and they came from the bookmobile. I was actually a person that missed independent bookstores for a long time because I grew up in a rural area. So bookstores were the Walden Books at the mall.
Yeah. Me too.
And then when I went to school, it was like Amazon kind of came in. There was a college bookstore and Amazon, basically. I didn't really step foot in an indie bookstore until I started going to Max Backs, which was around the corner from me in Cleveland.
They do overlap with high-income neighborhoods in general.
So,
independent bookstores, right?
So
like you're in big cities usually.
Yeah.
Like the Bronx has 2 independent bookstores. Manhattan has 82.
Yeah.
Same population.
Probably my favorite bookstore in the world is Quimby's in Chicago, which is the comic book shop.
Tell me more. I don't know it.
I haven't been there in years.
So Quimby is a comic shop.
So Quimby's is a comics focused bookstore in Chicago, and it's a wonderful place. And that was a pilgrimage.
What a rare breed now, eh? The comics focused bookstore.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how
we have the Beguiling in Toronto,
but in
that's
some
a tough
ways,
business.
yeah, you have some actually. Well, Montreal has some really. See, it's interesting because like in Canada, there's the French. Like Montreal has that French influence where they're super into comics, and like in France, I don't know if you know this, but like in France, cartoonists are gods. Like here, cartoonists is like one of the lowest life forms. Like cartoonists are. All American cartoonists are freaks, and they're all like kind of outcasts or whatever. In France, like there's a reason R. Crumb lives there. But like in France and in Belgium, cartoonists, from what I understand, they're really treated well over there. Form. Yeah. So the bande dessinée, or however you say it.
I love when you find stuff out like that's valued differently in other places, like the idea of like a calligrapher,
right?
Or someone.
But
that's
in
really,
Montreal, you could get some great comics because there's that French influence and that there's some really good.
The Drawn and Quarterly is there.
Drawn and Quarterly is there, and I think they're the greatest. I do think they're the greatest publisher in North America.
And they publish this book.
Yeah, I think every book they do is gorgeous. They send me. I'm on their list now, which I could not be happier about.
Oh my gosh!
There's a. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Love Actually.
Yeah.
But it's Billy Mack's
one of my wife's
character,
favorite movies.
He says, "Kids, don't buy drugs. Become a pop star, and they give them to you for free." I always make that joke when I open up my mail for galleys. Kids, don't buy books. Become an author, and they send them to you for free. That kind of, or a bookseller, because then the booksellers get advanced copies. But yeah, I would say library. The thing that makes me the proudest of all, the time I felt really proud to be an Austinite was when the public library opened downtown, which was maybe 5 years ago.
Well, that's one of the first times we met in person, right? Because I think it was Lance Lester, the collage artist.
Right.
You have the thing about collage artists.
Yep.
We saw a documentary together on the roof of the art gallery.
Right.
And you had told me that what propagated a lot of people's interest was they outfitted the whole library in his art.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what happened. Yeah. But that was sort of like, the mayor called it our civic cathedral. And that was the first time I actually felt, because I've always been very agnostic about Austin, the place and the person. Just because, I'm not like I'm not an evangelist for the place. It's hot, it's getting crowded, and it's expensive now. But that was the first time I felt real civic pride. I feel more now, but that was like a turning point for me, because that was the first time the city did something that I really cared about.
I like that. So we have dovetailed the favorite bookstore question into the Austin Public Library, which is beautiful. Yeah. Now, to close off this currently 2-hour and 19-minute conversation on this hot patio with our water cups now drained.
93.
Just lemon rinds at the bottom of them. The guacamole is scraped and brown. The grackles are still hunting for every crumb they could get around us. You guys can hear the music in the background. This has been a wonderful conversation about intention and beauty and art and creativity and curiosity and curation. To close us off, Austin Kleon, could you give one piece of hard-fought wisdom to everybody listening out there who aspires to deepening their artistic intentions? I'm going to keep it purposely broad instead of saying a writer or an artist. People out there that are listening to you right now thinking, I want to do a little bit more of that. What's one piece of wisdom you'd leave us with to close off this conversation today?
Write the book you want to read, which I think is a message from a lot of authors. You can write what you think the world wants, and then you can write what you know, but that rarely pays off, actually. Like, a lot of times, my book, you mentioned Keep Going.
Yes.
Keep Going was a book I was like, the world needs this.
2017, right?
2019.
Oh, 2019, okay.
This is the book the world needs. It was the book I needed to read, for sure. But it was a book I felt I was like, this is it, man. This one hits. This is like, and it did fine. It did fine. But it did not have the...
Gretchen Rubin says, didn't find its audience. That's what she always says.
Well, I don't know if it didn't find its audience as much as it just didn't make the splash that I thought it would. And so, like, I don't regret writing that book at all, because I'm just saying that what you feel sure of is the thing that's might not work. And the thing that you think is, like, easy or comes naturally... And everyone who's worked online knows this. The stuff that takes you like 5 seconds to do, it goes viral. And the stuff you kill yourself and you feel like is a real passion project or whatever, it's like, it barely. So I guess it barely makes a dent. I guess my advice, I'm going to change my advice actually in midstream, and I'm going to say, stay open to the possibility that you might be the worst judge of your own work. Andy Warhol said, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. That's for other people to, you can't take anything Warhol says at face value. But there is a sense in which the art is, if we go back to that idea that's about energy, you put the energy you can into the work, but then it takes the energy of other people to unlock it. And that energy might not be there, or it might not be there for 100 years. Because there are a lot of books that people died, nobody read them, and then someone found them later, and they became these big books. So I would say, it's the old boring advice. Make lots of stuff and put it in the world and see what happens.
Austin Kleon, thank you so much for coming on 3 Books. I really appreciate it.
This was really fun. Thank you.
Hey everybody, it's just me, just Neil again, hanging out in my basement with my backpack full of wires, my laptop on my legs, beside my beautiful 3-year-old son lying beside me, who's eating cashews with his pink and green painted fingernails and his tie-dyed shirt that he made himself, right? Did you make that yourself?
With Jenny.
Yes, with Jenny, with his aunt, with Leslie's sister. It's wonderful hanging out with my son and listening back to the conversation with Austin Kleon. That was a magical day. That was a magical moment. I hope the sun came through. I hope the heat came through. I hope the weather came through. The atmosphere came through. That electric kind of connection I felt that we had. I got a lot of quotes, like over 30 quotes written down here. People get real guilty about their unread book piles. To me, it's a win for possibility. What a healthy reframe that connects perfectly to our no book shame, no book guilt ethos on this show. Why feel guilty about having lots of books? It means you have an anti-library, right? As Nassim Taleb would call it. And that reminds you of what you don't know. So that's great. How about this one? Books are time travel devices. Just a really simple metaphor in 5 words. Books are time travel devices. Wonderful way to explain to people. And I like that whole kind of rant he went on about how we overvalue travel. It's large and clunky and expensive and cumbersome. But meanwhile, you could read a book and go somewhere further away, especially if you're just kind of going to Iran to go to the Starbucks. And I didn't just make up that metaphor. I have friends that have done that kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, you count off the countries you've been to and check them off of a box. But are you really soaking into a new experience? It might even be hard to do that while you travel because you're in the bubble of what a traveler sees. Maybe we can go deeper on that. Here's another quote. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he says, "What Thoreau and Sedaris did for me is show me a repeatable way of working indefinitely. You set up systems in which you're never devoid of material because you're constantly writing." That's a wonderful one. Obviously, Thoreau is long gone, but if you are interested in David Sedaris and you want to go deeper on there, Chapter 18 of our podcast was hanging out with David Sedaris, and he says to us on that show, I write every single day. I write on Christmas. I write on my birthday, right? What a healthy, is it healthy? I think it's healthy. Healthy if you're a writer, healthy process and practice. 3, I use social media as a public notebook. I love this reframe, and I've started to do it since then. If you have been following me on Twitter, I don't talk a lot about my social media because I like hanging out here. But if you follow me at Neil Pasricha on Twitter, you probably notice like I just post stuff now. I don't try to present like a really powerful, impactful quote, although I do sometimes post quotes and stuff from my books. But I like, if I catch something interesting, I post it there. Why? Because then I know I can use Twitter's advanced search function to find it later. So it is like a public notebook, a way to keep things, like an Evernote type of thing. And lastly, write the book you want to read. How often have you said, I wish there was a book about this or that? That is a sign that the market needs your thoughts or your ideas. And that's a good way to pull yourself in. Mr. Austin Kleon, thank you so much for giving us so much of your time. You're very generous. We really appreciate it. And thank you for giving us 3 more books to add to our top 1,000. If you are new here, you can head on over to top3books.co/the top 1,000 for a list of every single formative book on the show, including now number 672, Lies My Teacher Told Me by James Loewen, Loewen. Number 671, What It Is by Linda Barry, that's Barry. And number 670, The Journal of Henry David Thoreau by, of course, Henry David Thoreau. And I loved and was fascinated by the fact that it was the journals of Thoreau that sucked him in, not Walden, as a lot of people kind of get into Thoreau stuff. Actually, for me, it was an essay called Walking, which I have featured on my blog a few times, Walking by Henry David Thoreau. Just a really nice long essay on the power of the good long walk. Austin, thank you for being here. 3 Bookers, thank you for being here. Thank you for everyone for making this show a success. We're winning awards. Apple's Best Of. We're ranked in the top 0.5% of all podcasts. These are extrinsic motivators, so I don't talk about them that much, but you are making this show a real hit, and I really, really appreciate your love. Thank you. Are you still here? Did you make it past the 3-second pause? If so, I want to welcome you back to the end of the podcast club. This is where you guys call me at 1-833-READ-A-LOT. Again, if you are listening to this, please call me. I'd love your phone calls. All you have to do is call that number, 1-833-READ-A-LOT, and tell us one thing that jumped out to you from a chapter or a conversation, and maybe give us a formative book, or just hang out. Let us know. Let us hear your voice. We love getting phone calls. We also have the Cover to Cover Club and the Secret Club, which I can't say more about, but you can call our phone number for clues. It's 100% analog only. But before we get into all that, let's jump off, as we always do, by going to the phones.
Hi, Neil. My name is Teresa, and I live in Orange, Texas. I have been enjoying listening to your podcast, and I've listened all the way through the end, and I wanted to call the number and find out about the other club. I like what y'all say about it's okay to put down a book and just move on and find another book. That has been a new idea for me. I've had a lot of book shame over books that I only read part way and then they stay on my shelf. Well, now I can just get rid of them and not worry about it anymore, and I love that. I could comment on almost all of your shows. Every show leaves me with something interesting to think about. One of the shows, at the end of the show, you said that you don't like New Year's Eve's resolutions because we never rise to the level of our goals and we always fall to the level of our systems. And I thought that was a really interesting thought, and I would love to read some books about that. But anyway, thank you for what you're doing. I enjoy your podcast, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much to Teresa from Orange, Texas. Nice to play a Texan voicemail for a Texan guest after a Texan conversation. Absolutely on No Book Shame, No Book Guilt. You know, somebody was just asking me how I read The Inevitable, right, which is Kevin Kelly's book, which we talked about on the last chapter. And I was explaining to them, I was like, okay, I read the cover. I usually read the whole cover. I mean, the whole front cover, the whole back cover, the whole inside pages, the biography, the acknowledgement, the index. So all that superfluous, like extraneous, what's that word? Extraneous, you know what I'm looking for. The opening matter and the close matter, like the front and back stuff. I read all of that, the detail, the fine print, because that to me is like kind of getting a good swirl of what the book's about. Then the table of contents, then the introduction. I usually read the introduction all the way through, especially if the author's written it, because for me, that is like kind of like the abstract or the summary of the book. And then I pick up the chapters I want to read. And in this case, I think the book was 9 or 10 chapters. I read the first 5. And then of the last 5, I think I just picked out 1, maybe. So that's how I read the book. So of the whole book, which is probably 250 pages, there's probably like 75, 80 pages I didn't read. Did I think I read it? Absolutely. Do I have it on my bookshelf? Absolutely. Are lots of things underlined? Absolutely. Do I feel any guilt or shame about it? No. I don't even have to read those chapters in order. I didn't even have to read that much. I don't have to read anything. No book guilt, no book shame. And for more on falling to the level of your systems, that's actually an old quote from like thousands of years ago by like this old martial artist. I first heard that quote from Tim Ferriss. So he's the author of the 4-Hour Workweek, if you don't know it. But it's been repurposed and edited, as he does so well, by James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits. So James is really gifted at taking wisdom or letters or advice and simplifying it and distilling it into other pieces. He's done that with some of my essays in the past, and I commend him for it because he's making things easier to digest and simplifying them. So the book that does that well is Atomic Habits. So that will help you on your road to falling to the level of your systems. Thank you so much again to Teresa. All right, now let's head over to a letter of the chapter. You know what I'm going to do for this? I'm going to go to the YouTube page of the Quentin Tarantino chapter, right? So we hung out with Quentin Tarantino in chapter 82, a mere 20-something chapters ago, and there's 156 comments on the on the conversation. One that just came in a few hours ago says, "You two grok, man. It was such a pleasure listening to you guys discuss film and literature. Reminds me of the comic book geeks I was rolling with. They got me into Star Wars. I'm more of a Steinbeck, Capote, Hinton, HST, Irving T. Williams fan, but they were so passionate and intense about film and comics, and you guys LOL'd as one of them." I love that. James says, "And the 3 books are, it'd be nice to note them in your summary. I may have missed this. Thanks. Tarantino definitely Tarantino'd this interview. Clearly you have a Pasricha style, and that's a compliment." All right, another one. "Such pleasant and positive vibes between you two. Really appreciate how kind you both were during this interview. 10 out of 10, says John a couple weeks ago. William 10 days ago says, "The thing about Pauline Kael not wanting reviews to be just ads for movies rings as ironic, considering the controversy over her hanging out with Altman and others to promote the new ramshackle aesthetic." So this is like film nerd conversations that are way over my head. Bicycle Man says, "Am I the only one who found Reservoir Dogs a bit boring and the dialogue struck? It's fun to read all the YouTube comments on big conversations that we have on YouTube." So thank you so much if you've checked out the Quentin Tarantino conversation back in chapter 82. If not, now's a good time. Check it out. That was a really fun one that we did last summer. All right, and now let's close off with a word of the chapter. And for this chapter's word, let's head back to Austin Kleon.
And there's always a lot of shenanigans.
Yes, indeed, it is shenanigans. Shenanigan. Usually I hear it as shenanigans plural, but it is a noun, according to Merriam-Webster, a devious trick used especially for an underhand purpose. Or 2, A, tricky or questionable practices or conduct, usually used in plural, or high-spirited or mischievous activity, again, usually used in plural. Urban Dictionary, what do you think? Well, Urban Dictionary says, feisty fun with jokes and rowdy behavior. For example, "I can just tell that shenanigans will occur tonight." Yeah, that's kind of where I hear it as well. But where did this word come from? Well, it turns out that the origin is unknown. The word started appearing in the mid-19th century, around 1855 in San Francisco during the California Gold Rush. Some people believe it is a short form of the Spanish word chanada or charanada, which means to trick or deceit. Some people over at the in the comments over at the stackexchange.com where they're discussing this word in 2017 said, "You know what, at the time there's a lot of shenanigans that took place during the California Gold Rush, and the ethnic makeup of California at the time would argue for the Spanish origin. However, other people think it might actually be an Irish word." Some people are saying in the comments that there is an Irish word that's Sion Ashugam. It's a really long spelling. I'm probably mispronouncing it, which means in Irish a typical phrase that means "I play the fox." Some people in the comments are saying, "I typically hear Irish people using that word more," and some people are suggesting it actually was an Irish last name, Shenanigan. Doesn't it kind of sound like one? Am I being a total bigot by thinking that might be true? Who knows? I'm just trying to follow the rabbit hole that is the etymology online of the word shenanigans. Remember, the origin is unclear, but it first emerged during the California Gold Rush around the 1850s, where a lot of shenanigans do occur. I hope that we are having a lot of shenanigans on this show. We're kind of getting to we're not getting to the halfway point yet, but we're getting closer, right? 672, 671, 670. Before we know it, we're going to hit the 500th book, and then we'll be halfway through our pilgrimage. It's been a journey. It has been a lot of laughs, a lot of tears, a lot of in-depth conversations, a lot of fun conversations, and a lot of shenanigans sprinkled in. I can't thank Austin Kleon enough for agreeing and coming on the program, for being so fun to prepare with, to get these books, to order them, to read them, to kind of fly down there, to hang out, to get beautiful food. If you are in Austin, Texas, please go check out Mi Madres. If you are online, please check out Austin Kleon at Austin Kleon on every social media channel and austinkleon.com. Until next time, remember that you are what you eat and you are what you read. Keep turning that page, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.